Well, welcome members to the 32nd meeting of the Finance Committee in the 22 to 27 mandate. As always, the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. Members and those in the public gallery, you're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're either in airplane mode or muted. Apologies, we don't have apologies, but we have a couple of members who have indicated they will join via Zoom. Declaration of interests. Does any member have an interest they wish to declare?
Deputy Chair.
Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Under item, I think it's scheduled 5.23. I'm a member of the Audit Committee, just when that comes up.
Thank you. And obviously, at any point later during the proceedings, members can declare an interest, should it be relevant. Agenda item 3 is Chairperson's business. And the first item is correspondence to the Secretary of State. Members, at page 6 of your meeting pack, you'll find a draft letter. At the meeting on the 27th of November, I should have said, by the way, if I could just, as an item of Chairperson's business, to thank Dr. Aiken for stepping into the chair last week and keeping the show on the road. And apologies again for my absence. But to go back to agenda item 3.1, on the 27th of November, we agreed to consider a draft reply to the Secretary of State regarding the NI Executive Restoration Package. The Secretary of State previously indicated to this committee that agreement had been reached to move to the next stage of the fiscal framework discussions, and that more time is needed to ensure any further agreement on the long-term fiscal framework is robust and will support the fiscal sustainability of Northern Ireland's public finances. He also indicated that whilst he does not believe, quote, it would be appropriate for NIO officials to appear in front of Assembly committees, he wishes to work constructively and collaboratively with the Northern Ireland Executive towards the full implementation of the restoration package. Members, there's a draft response to the Secretary of State in your pack. It is really for discussion on suggested amendments. I have a couple of suggested minor amendments, but I'm willing to hear any other comments on the draft or suggested amendments. And obviously, members can correspond subsequently with the clerk. We don't have to agree it precisely now. Obviously, we're keener to do it sooner rather than later. But does anybody have any amendments or suggested additions? Okay. From my perspective, I think it's a very good letter, and thanks to the clerk and team for drafting it. These are really relatively small drafting issues, but I think in paragraph 3, I would suggest we slightly soften some of the language to suggest that there is an argument in particular in specific circumstances for UK government officials to consider appearing in front of Assembly committees. I think we just need to kind of acknowledge that as a default, it isn't the UK government, and may have a point that our job is primarily to scrutinise the Northern Ireland Civil Service and Northern Ireland ministers. So I think if we can just add a little clause in saying that there's a strong argument in specific circumstances, and then in the next paragraph, in the following paragraphs, we go on to explain what we think one of those circumstances is, which is the Permanent Secretary of the NIO participating in the Public Sector Transformation Board. And to that end, I guess it's the 4th paragraph, I wonder if we just make clear that we are endeavouring to understand Ms. Julie Harrison's role on the Public Sector Finance and the Public Sector Transformation Board, rather than engage her in a broader discussion about NIO business. I think that's reasonable for us to make clear that it was specifically in that regard, and we could also say that could be in conjunction with other members of that board, should she or her colleagues so wish.
Chair, just to go for that, I think it's just also worth emphasising that we're not using this we will not use this as a reason for or setting a precedent. It's specifically because we're looking at the Interim Transformation Board.
Yes, but I would say that we do, elsewhere in the letter, we do acknowledge that there are precedents. So I think, I guess the point we're trying to make is that there are already precedents for UK officials and ministers in certain circumstances briefing devolved Assembly committees. All we're asking is that they approach it with an open mind where it's particularly germane to the work of a committee. I would also, one final thing for me in paragraph 5 is where it says, grateful if you could provide members with details on how you fit into the governance structure of the board. I think it would probably be better to say where the NIO fits into the governance structure of the board. Other than that, I am content. I don't know if any other members have any issues. Okay, we'll move on then.
Chair,
Thank
it
you.
might just be useful because you've outlined that if members agree to that edit now and then I send out a final proof.
People agree
just so
to
members
they're
have
fairly
hard copy,
relatively minor with the ones I've suggested. People are content.
because we
and
didn't
then
mark
issue.
it as agreed.
And I think we're and for the purposes of the record, if there are any representatives are watching, that the purpose of this letter is genuinely not to have a fight for the sake of it. It's simply to look at how we can improve scrutiny and situations in which scrutiny from UK government officials is genuinely germane and essential for the work of scrutiny committees.
Chair, just to speed process up, I would recommend, or I would request that just yourself and the deputy chair sign off on it, because I think we've all agreed to the bits and
Yeah,
pieces.
I think we've agreed now. If people are content, yeah.
We're
Okay.
gonna get it, but I will provide everybody with a hard
So
copy.
people can see what it is. Okay.
Or electronic
Thank you.
copy.
Okay. 3.2 and 3.3 is the Peace Summit Partnership. The Peace Summit Partnership, which members may or may not be aware of, it's a sort of multi-group partnership. We've done really interesting work. It includes organisations like the Human Foundation and another number of other organisations. They've written to the committee forwarding a copy of its correspondence to the executive, enclosing its response to the draft PFG. The partnership has also requested an opportunity to meet with this committee to discuss the potential incorporation of a duty to cooperate in the draft PFG. A duty to cooperate with them, or a duty to cooperate within?
I think within the executive and across departments.
Okay. I'd be happy to have so the suggestion is that we schedule an informal meeting with them in the first instance, but I don't know if the Deputy Chair wants to.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wondered, had they written to TEO? I don't know if it
Yeah.
would sit better if they met with TEO first with their position. Happy to discuss, but just in terms of what it is they're
I think that's a
looking
good.
for.
I think that's a very good point. I think we should just check with the Executive Office first whether they, before we agree to schedule. I think we could just check whether the Executive Office has, because it's not that they're not. It's not important. And obviously, we are a strategic scrutiny committee in that sense. But if the TO or TO committee is already looking at it, that might be a good starting place. Okay, we'll wait until we get that response. The next agenda item is meeting with the NI Affairs Committee, which myself and the Vice Chair had on Tuesday, 3rd of December. And just to give people an update, it was a useful discussion. If Diane wishes to come in, they had some questions. At times, it was like a little bit like a seminar with undergraduates who were like had picked up a new subject. Some of them, obviously, there were people who were very experienced there, including the local MPs who are obviously been in that committee before. But a lot of it was kind of giving a broader committee view on the fiscal position, some of the negotiations between the UK government and the executive.
Is there a
And it was
paper on that?
useful
Sorry,
discussion.
Chair, I just can't see it.
Sorry, it's
No chair.
sorry.
It's just a
Sorry,
reflection.
apologies.
It's just a chairperson
No,
business,
no,
so it's just a
perfect,
reflection. Yeah. It was, but I don't know if you wish to add anything to it. It was a useful, rather informal discussion.
It was it was a meeting over a working lunch, and it was really useful to get to meet the new members of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. Obviously, the local MLA or the local MPs that we already knew that were there was Gavin Robinson, Saoirse Eastwood. They asked a lot of questions about the finance of Northern Ireland. They're very interested in the Fiscal Council, how we're moving forward with that. What did come up, which was quite interesting, was their concern over the lack of hard and fast reliable data on finances per head, things that we had already sort of raised here in committee. So they were very interested in that. They made reference to ONS, NISRA, just being able to lift particular things. The cost of legacy situation in Northern Ireland. They were talking about amount spent per head through the times of the Troubles and where we are now. So there was a great interest in measurabilities, and I think that it really supports the work that we are looking to do going forward, to gather that information, to get some things to be able to cite. And they also were quite interested in our inquiry, given that the banking services and insurance being governed at Westminster, and just us taking the opportunity to raise the fact that there are specific issues in Northern Ireland with regard to that. So they'd be quite interested to stay on the loop, I think, on that.
Indeed, yeah, it was a good meeting, and I think we had stuff to share with them from the Fiscal Commission. And okay, the next agenda item is another informal meeting that was held earlier this week, but others on the committee. I think most of us were in attendance. It was with the NI Business Coalition, which was on Monday this week. And at page 4 of the table pack is a short note of that meeting, and at page 7 of the table pack is a revised letter from the Business Coalition reflecting their increased membership. The coalition has highlighted the issues as a result of the UK budget. They were pretty robust in terms of their position about where things are, and in calling for the Finance Minister to use Barnett consequentials from rate relief in England to provide commensurate support to Northern Ireland, and they also met with the Minister beforehand. So there is there's a letter 521. Okay, great, that's fine. Okay, so members, that's reached a note the minute of the meeting, which is in the pack, and we will obviously be engaging with them, including in our stakeholder events later on. Sorry, the Vice Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on the back of that, I think it was, there wasn't that many of us were at the meeting on Monday morning. I know separately, obviously, they've engaged with the Economy Committee, but, just to reiterate the point made that this is really, really urgent to the sector. They talked very much about the 1st of April being a cliff edge for the businesses, with the increase in the employer's contributions, the minimum wage, and really on a call for some sort of immediate support. So, as this committee, we're looking at the LPS, we're looking at the rating policy and things coming forward later in this meeting. I wonder, should we consider writing to the Finance Minister ourselves as to immediate potential action, or a briefing on how she felt after her meeting with this particular sector? Because obviously the short-term measures that are outlined in the Minister's statement are the fact that they reviewed and have opened a consultation this year, and they're going to be doing more consultation next year. There's no actual short-term actions that's going to help in terms of rates or review for these businesses.
I agree. I would be very, I'm strongly minded to agree with that, and I think we should write to the Minister. Indeed, I think it was her statement last week was very clear that she will launch a review into the cost of doing business, and that's not a bad thing, but obviously we're quite well enamoured of reviews in this place, and I think a clear message from that particularly that small business and high street business sector is that they think there will be closures before or immediately after the beginning of the next financial year, as they deal with, or simply can't deal with, so shut the doors, deal with the increased costs. So I would be minded to write to the Minister to ask what, if any, measures are being put in place in terms of urgent business support, and if there aren't any measures being put in place, whether her department or the Economy Department, working kind of collectively, have produced a kind of estimate of what the potential impact is going to be. So if members are content with that.
I could just add to that, Chair. Thank you. I think the Minister in her statement was quite clear that from her perspective there will be no immediate support scheme within this financial year. Incoming financial year, any review and consultation will not impact until the rating of 26-27, which is clearly for those businesses who met with members and others is called comfort. In her statement, she made clear that in her view the rating system was not the best vehicle for short-term immediate support. So I'd be keen to learn, in her view, what is the best vehicle for doing that. Because the Minister for the Economy has made no submission in this year's budget for any support for businesses. So I'm just keen to get her view as to, if it's not the rating system in her view is the best way to support businesses in this crisis, what is?
I think it's also worth saying, I'll bring Steve Aiken in a second, I think it's also worth saying that she may have that policy in relation to rating agency, but if there was to be a system of direct cash support targeted to certain businesses, then probably LPS would be the obvious agency to do it, given they did it during COVID. Steve Aiken.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. I also met with them afterwards, and took them down for lunch afterwards, and they were a bit more vociferous sort of below. But the 2 points that came very clear, and I think it's germane to our conversation we're having today, was the issues with the two people who are most likely to shut them down are LPS and HMRC. Now, we have no control over HMRC, but the question they were asking is there anything we can do with LPS to be deemed to be not lenient was the word, but a bit more understanding, I think, was one of the questions that they wanted to put forward. And they said, their concern was that this is this is going to happen in the next couple of months, and that's what they're really concerned about. And they said they can't deal with HMRC, but could they be able to do something about LPS? So maybe that might be, with the agreement of the committee, that might be fed in.
Okay, that is that is noted. We do have LPS in front of us in a few minutes, so we can obviously raise some of those questions with them. Okay, so if members are content, we will write to the Minister on that basis. And we will also be ensuring that we continue to engage with the Business Coalition Group on both our stakeholder event and also on the banking inquiry.
Chair, if members are minded, it would be ideal if we could do an event with the Business Coalition membership around the inquiry. They brought forward a lot of banking experience.
That's
so
exactly.
Members are content, we can go ahead and organise that.
It's exactly the kind of thing that I think we want to use the banking inquiry to focus on, because in situations where there is a new cost, a new fixed cost, which is it's not a fixed cost, but anyway, a new cost, which is increased national insurance contributions and increased living wage contributions. That's the kind of conversation where people, if they have a bank that is supporting them, they will be able to have conversations with what used to be their bank manager or their banking provider to talk about lending needs or about flexible terms on individual loan products they may have already, all that kind of thing. And we need to understand if they're getting the support or not getting the support from, because that's what business banking is supposed to be all about. So anyway, that's I think we need to understand whether they're getting supported in that way too. Okay, people are content. The next is an LCM on the Property, Digital Assets, etc. Bill 2024. Members, the Department has provided an update in relation to the timing for the anticipated LCM, and the update is that MOJ colleagues have been in touch and suggested, I'm quoting here from the Department, have been in touch and suggested that the laying of the LCM should wait until an amendment to extend the Bill's provisions to here, meaning Northern Ireland, I presume, is both formally agreed. To date, an offer was made. The Minister and the Executive agreed to the principle of extension, and the Minister has written back to MOJ to confirm all this, and then the amendment is made at Westminster. Okay, so there's a little bit of chicken and egg here. They have to lay an amendment in order to extend the territorial reach of the bill. I think is what has to happen, and then the LCM is laid. Okay, that's fine. So that we will come back and discuss this LCM in the new year at the meeting on the 22nd of January. Members are content? Pardon me. The next agenda item are draft minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of December. That's at page 27 of the meeting pack. Members, if you're content, there are true reflection. I will sign the minutes. Members are content? Okay. The next agenda item is matters arising. And the first matter arising is the readout from the departmental liaison officer regarding requests made in the 20th of November meeting. So there's a table in there which has responses which we're going to consider. The first response is a readout from the Minister from the Banking Roundtable, which happened on the 27th of November. We requested an urgent readout from that roundtable. Members may wish to note that the membership of the roundtable mostly mirror those the committee has scheduled oral evidence with in relation to the committee's inquiry into banking. However, the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters does not feature on our list, and Millisle Community Association replaced Millisle Post Office. The Department has indicated that a short report on the roundtable will be shared with this committee once agreed by attendees. I would obviously urge that happens. I think it's a good thing that these meetings happen, but I suppose I would hope that given that it's not entirely clear what the precise output was from this roundtable, other than sharing information, and that's never a bad thing in and of itself, that our inquiry might be able to come up with some more specific observations or even recommendations, and there may be recommendations for local devolved departments, or there may be recommendations for UK institutions. Okay, members, that's to note really, unless anybody wishes to comment on it. Yep. The next readout response are minutes of the meetings between the Public Sector Transformation Board and the Minister on the 31st of July. So that is at page 41 of the meeting pack. The committee previously requested a copy of the minute of the meeting between the Public Sector Transformation Board and the Minister of Finance, which took place on the 31st of July. This was included in last week's pack, which is there for people to see. And so members, we just if you're happy to note those minutes, unless anybody wishes to comment on them. The next readout response from the DALO is that following the oral briefing with the Government Accounts Branch on the 20th of November, the committee asked if it could provide any assistance to the branch, as in the Government Accounts Branch. Officials have thanked the committee for their offer and indicated there's nothing at the present time. It's very decorous of them and us. So anyway, but they hopefully they'll keep in touch with us if they have anything else that we can help them with. 5.5 is the DALO readout response on schedule of subordinate legislation. The committee had requested a schedule of upcoming subordinate legislation from the department in order to facilitate planning, particularly given the committee's already busy work programme. The department has finally provided such a schedule, and by the way, I think we requested this quite a long time ago. However, whilst the list of anticipated SRs is helpful, dates are either not provided at all or are provided covering entire months. So that's to seek agreement to note the schedule and ask the department to provide specific dates for all the items of subordinate legislation. And further to that, if members are content, I would ask that we should also ask, even more important perhaps than the subordinate legislation, is that we ask the department for an update on its primary legislation.
We have an update.
We have an update, is it in the pack? Okay.
As we wrote previously.
Of course, okay, fair enough. Given that we have... Steve Aiken.
Yeah, just looking at sort of the subordinate legislation, there's some stuff in there that's obviously about rate relief and various other bits of regulations. Well, they can't go ahead until we've got the budget. So they've put in here that there's for April and whatever happens to be, but there's actually, unless we get the budget, the timelines of that, it's going to push all that.
Yeah, we will obviously be talking about the budget. Okay. 5.6 is from the Minister of Finance. That is correspondence to the Concurrent Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. This is concurrently to the ERA Committee and the Infrastructure Committee. We were copied into a response from the Minister of Finance to the chairs of ERA and Infrastructure. The committees held a concurrent meeting on the 12th of November with the UFU to discuss issues regarding the A5. Excuse me. A number of the queries have been raised with the committee regarding the vesting of the land in the corridor, and this committee has been copied into the Minister's response. Okay, so that's to note. The next agenda item is from the Minister for Finance, and it regards the question which we have been discussing of a private entity utilising financial transactions capital. So that is at page 51 of the tabled pack. If you sorry, the tabled pack, not the normal pack, I'm talking to myself. The Minister has replied setting out several issues to be considered in relation to the use of FTC for regeneration projects. The Minister has also confirmed that cooperatives or social enterprises would be eligible to receive FTC, provided they are classified as being outside the public sector. Furthermore, FTC can be channeled through a local council. So as long as the ultimate recipient is a private sector body, and if the council makes an agreement with a relevant sponsor department. Finally, the Minister believes the main issue causing the underutilisation of FTC is likely to be finding a suitable private sector is likely to be a difficulty in finding suitable private sector projects which directly align with departmental objectives and the programme for government. Further to this, the projects have to be able to demonstrate they can generate a strong and reliable revenue stream from which repayments can be made, and such conditions may not exist in relation to public sector investment. I would just say that there are quite a lot of, I'm making these comments in a personal capacity, there are quite a lot of computer says that's quite difficult bits of this letter, but it doesn't say that it is not possible to use FTC for example, regeneration purposes. And indeed, I would personally think, and I'm making a personal comment here, I'm not speaking as chair, I would think that a vesting and deploying FTC in a commercially advantageous bit of Belfast City Centre in order to overcome a bit of dereliction would be a completely reasonable use of FTC, because it would be, you would definitely get the repayment. We'll bring in members who wish to comment. Steve Aiken.
Yes, please. Just remind us, I've been nice to the DUP twice in a day. Question that Minister Lyons responded to me from the floor, and I asked the question about FTC. So obviously, Department of Community seems to have identified a route for the use of FTC, particularly within the sort of the charitable sector and sort of the social housing sector. So I've just reread that letter, and it does seem to be slightly disingenuous, bearing in mind sort of communities is making progress on use of FTC. but it's just an observation.
Well, I think it was written specifically to answer the question about regeneration, but talking about it more broadly. So I think part of it might have been written to slightly quell the ardour of a certain person who raised it on the floor of the Assembly. Owen Tennis.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry, Philip Brett's first.
No,
go ahead.
you go first.
It was just a reflection of part of the letter. So, sort of final substantive point talks about the Minister's views and why there's been an underutilisation of FTC funds, and she says that that hasn't been examined in detail to date, and that to me seems quite bizarre, given that this is a problem that we have every year. So it's just, I guess, if it's possible to get an understanding from the department. I mean, is that something that they intend to do? Because there are opportunities. I mean, Steve's right in terms of communities, and there's a pilot there. I'm sure there are opportunities in terms of the economic strategy, even for the economy minister to have a role in terms of promoting opportunities for private sector investment, and even the Office for Investment on the UK government side, which has a presence in Belfast, and could open some doors in terms of educating those organisations about the opportunities that exist, because there doesn't seem to be, I think, a concerted effort to raise the profile of FTC and its potential, and I don't think there's a good public understanding of it. But we don't see anything from the department so far, I think, which seeks to rectify that.
I think that's definitely true, and I think there's that sticks out. Sorry, from the letter that there's been no examination of it. Philip.
Yeah, no, it's just to build on the point Owen makes. You know, it's not that there's a lack of understanding or lack of projects that align to the programme for government. I think it's a lack of consistent development of this by the Department for Finance over many years. You know, there are some projects in there, a car park, for example. Not sure how that aligns with the programme for government. It's an important project.
Is the Northern Ireland Investment Fund?
Yes. But you know, this could easily be used in a whole series of things, and I actually think the Department for Finance needs to take a much stronger lead on this issue. We can't cry poverty when we're not utilising the funds that are sitting in there.
I think that's a really robust point. I think in the investment fund, it is hard to claim that everything has to align with the programme of government if you're subsidising car parks, basically, and hotels, and yeah, I think that's absurd, and I don't want to make this assumption, but it would be tempting. It's hard to avoid the assumption that because this is a bit more work and a bit challenging to create the kind of entity. So I just, for me and from a party perspective, put forward the idea of using FTC, if necessary, to pump prime the dereliction in northern Belfast City Centre around Tribeca, which is dreadful for the city and frankly it's dreadful for the whole region. And clearly there is no legal impediment to doing that, other than, well, now there may be a legitimate debate about whether that is the best thing for that particular project, but there's certainly no reason to not have that level of ambition and creativity around using FTC. So can I suggest we go back to the department relatively robustly and write to say, we acknowledge that you have said there is no legal or structural impediment to using it for example, regeneration purposes. We are somewhat perturbed, perhaps, to see that the executive of the department has never, as Owen said, and as they say in the letter, specifically investigated the reasons for underutilisation, other than giving us a kind of, well, it's kind of, and ask whether they are, rather than simply encouraging ministers, encouraging departments to do this. Clearly there is a barrier in that if officials obviously in communities are doing a relatively a better job, but that's because there's an entire sector called housing associations who have people with commercial expertise and probably the legal expertise, and now the model to go and get that funding. If, for example, another bit of the communities department or even the economy department wanted to use it for example, a regeneration project, if that model isn't there, someone has to invent it. Is there the ambition to be creative? And I don't think there is, clearly. And so I suppose the question is, are they going to do more than encourage people, and will they devote some energy to actually coming up with proactive ways of spending it?
Just feel, we've touched on this before over the years. I just think that government department, civil service land just sees this as too hard to touch, too complicated to manage. And there is issues. There will have to be additional safeguards, and there are pitfalls around this, because when you dabble in the private sector, it's a much more volatile space. So imagine if a company goes bust halfway through a project. How do you claw that money back as public money? So you have all those questions to be answered, but it's not beyond the wit of man to sort this out. And I think the prize at the end of the day is unlocking this money in order to for the betterment of our people and our community and our built forums. So there must be ways. There must be ways of getting some. There must be examples throughout the world of how a transaction like this, utilising funds like this, can be interacted into the common good.
Yeah. Agreed. Okay. So I think we can write back to that end if people are content they have that. Folks, we're just going to move slightly forward in the agenda in order to manage our time in relation to the oral evidence we're going to receive. So, members are content with that? We're going to agenda item 6, which is the designation of bodies, estimates and accounts amendment order 2024, and just run through a couple of bits or statutory rules. This is page 123 of the meeting pack. There's a clerk's cover note and relevant correspondence from the department. The department intends to bring forward a statutory rule under the Government Resources and Accounts Act. The rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure and will designate specific central government bodies in relation to named government departments for the purposes of those departments, supply estimates and accounts. Full details of the proposed rule, consultation and impacts can be found at page 125 of the meeting pack. So members, does anybody have any questions about the proposed rule? Diane, for a second.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just on this one, so there's the proposal in it to remove one body and change the name of a number of others, but no supporting correspondence to say why or on whose authority, whether the relevant departments have approved it. So just like to know where it's come from, which approvals are in place, and a wee bit of reasoning behind who's been removed and why the changes have been brought forward.
Yes, I agree. I think there's a. Did anybody else wish to come in?
Can I just add to that, because there are valid questions that the Deputy Chairperson has raised, but how often does this happen? So is this a periodic SL1 type when people change, when organisations within government changes their names, and how often would it happen? How often has it happened in the past?
It does happen. I think we've probably been through it where they just kind of tweak it and they. So, for example, if you look at some of the changes of the names, they are under TO, the Northern Ireland Community Relations Council (brackets CRCNI) is changed to Northern Ireland Community Relations Council (brackets NICRC). So it's relatively reducive, but I'm happy if people wish to that we can just ask for a bit more. I personally think this is relatively kind of mundane stuff, yes. but I don't mind.
Change the name to give them money legally. That's what it is for.
Sorry?
They've got to change the name of the body to get the money legally. That's why they're changing.
I'm not sure.
My understanding is you have this designation piece of legislation every year to allow the accounts and the estimates to be laid, but it's just whenever you're listing bodies to be removed and body names to be changes, I would just like to see some clarity coming from DOF, TEO and DFE to make sure that the approvals have come through, because obviously the reference to these bodies will be in contracts, just to make sure that it's come through all the appropriate channels.
Unless there's any huge pressure for that, like if we can just bring this back and discuss it in the new year, if people would like that clarification.
Just there, but
if it was a huge pressure, they should have brought it to us sooner.
The Historical Institutional Abuse Redress Board is now loses these, so I think most of these are relatively small, but I'm happy for us, for the purposes of being tidy-minded, to get extra information, and we'll go through the rule again. Okay, so we will then move on to the next agenda item, which is our. Sorry,
apologies. We might just actually do our other.
We might do another SL1 since we're in SL form today. We will SLN. Content. We'll move on to agenda item 9, which is the rates small business hereditament. I always hate having to say that word out loud. Relief. Amendment regulations, Northern Ireland 2025. So members, that's at page 385 of the meeting pack, and there's a clerk's cover note and relevant correspondence. The department intends to bring forward a statutory rule under the rates order. The rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure and will extend the existing small business rates relief scheme until 31st of March 2026. Full details of the proposed rule, consultation and impacts can be found at page 387 of the meeting pack. So, members, do I have any points to raise? My only point is obviously this is in the context of extreme distress for lots of these businesses and concern about what's happening next spring. So obviously we want to make sure we're update whatever the reliefs that do exist at the minute. We are prompt and rolling over. But I'll bring in the Deputy Chair, I think, wanted to go.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that, you know, in the absence of anything else, knowing that a number of these businesses are under pressure, having the clarity that this relief will be in place for another year would be welcome, and there doesn't appear to be any changes to what was already in place. It's just a roll forward of the same, so I am content.
Okay. Content, great. Agenda item. Sorry, I'm not coming back to yesterday's debate, as well as it speeded up the ageing process in me by several decades. We're going back to agenda item 7, everyone. The rating policy update. We're getting an oral briefing from the department. So if members are content that Hansard report this briefing, members, I will direct you to page 130 of the meeting pack, which has a clerk's memo relating to this item. The relevant papers are as follows: Department of Finance briefing paper, which was provided in advance of today's session, and that's at page 135 of the meeting pack. Department of Finance correspondence regarding the domestic rates revaluation, that's at page 146 of the meeting pack. LPS first day brief from February 24, which is at page 294 of the meeting pack. The LPS guide to rates from May 23, which is page 311, and a copy of the Minister's oral statement from Monday of this week, which is the rating policy strategic roadmap, and that's at page 145 of the table pack. So we welcome to the meeting Sharon Gallagher, who's Chief Executive to LPS, and a particular welcome to Sharon. This is the first time you appeared before us in your new role, so congratulations and welcome. Angela McGrath, who's with us again, who's Commissioner of Valuation. Andrew McAvoy, who's Director of Rating Policy Division of LPS, and Chris Rooney, who's Director of Revenue and Benefits. Sharon, please make a brief opening statement. We always, in the nicest possible way, always put the emphasis on brief, not because we don't want to hear from you, but because we want to get to questions. But please do make a statement.
Thank you, Chair. And it's probably slightly longer than it would normally be, given my newness to the role and just to set the context. But I hope there's nothing in there that is overly.
I'll let you know. I'll raise my eyebrow. As
please
do.
The
Government
please
Bank
do.
Of England, if it's yeah, okay.
So. Again, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to brief the committee today on those aspects of Land and Property Services work plan that will be of key interest to this committee in the short term, including emerging plans for a revaluation of domestic rates. My predecessor, Sharon McGee, endeavoured to work positively and openly with you, and whilst I do not profess to have Sharon's significant years of experience in LPS, I am nonetheless committed to continuing in that vein. You will already have met Andrew McAvoy, Director of Rating Policy, who is leading on the strategic review of rating policy, and also here today, as you have outlined earlier, are Angela McGrath, Director of Valuation and Commissioner for Northern Ireland, who will lead on the revaluation of domestic properties, and Chris Rooney, Director of Revenues and Benefits, who will administer and arrange collection of rates and oversee administration of rate supports. In terms of the span of the organisation's work, this is wide-reaching and complex, but at its core is the aim to provide land and property services at the highest level, with the most prominent public face of that work being the design and administration of the rating and valuation system for the Executive's only devolved tax lever, the land registration service underpinning our local conveyancing work, and the mapping skills and expert services provided by the staff within Ordnance Survey. The fact that these services allow us to register property, value it, map it, administer a tax base and collect revenue, all within one organisation, provides opportunities for innovation and delivery beyond that easily accessible in other jurisdictions where these functions are spread across different organisations. You will have heard Minister Archibald set out through oral statement on Monday her aims and objectives for the rating system moving forward. This will shape and determine the priorities, agenda and timing of LPS work plans in the months and years ahead. What I will outline today represents the most significant building blocks for achieving the Minister's ambition to generate much needed income to support public service delivery in a way that is fair and equitable. Turning first to rating policy, the next few weeks will focus on the progression of routine but important legislation to allow rates bills to issue for 25-26 and for general maintenance of the statute base ahead of turn of year billing. The committee will be familiar with that process from last year, and although there is a little more time to play with it this year, this work always happens within a compressed time frame at the start of each calendar year. I know that Andrew has been and will be working with the DALO and the subcommittee team to ensure that as much material for that legislative process can come through to the committee before Christmas, and that's starting with an SL1 tabled for today on small business rate relief. Of a more strategic nature and in line with the Minister's statement, we will also be preparing to launch the consultation early next year for proposals on an uplift to the maximum capital value for rating and reduction of early payment discount. The team will lead this consultation, and the outworkings of that process will inform the Minister's position, which he will bring to the Executive for consideration and determination.
That's why it's now too late for that to be in 25-26. Yep. Those changes can't happen for 25-26, even if the Executive agreed to them.
Indeed.
Yeah, okay.
The committee will play obviously a key role in that process, and we're eager to support your understanding and scrutiny in whatever way is helpful. In addition, LPS will support department colleagues in facilitating the cost of doing business research project, also announced this week. The Minister has commissioned this work as a direct result of engagement with business groups in recent weeks following the UK Government Chancellor's autumn statement. The scope and timescales of that work are to be agreed and will be cognisant of the views of the business community. As a next step in the Minister's 10-year strategic review cycle, all of reporting support, we will be laying the groundwork for the reviews of small business rate relief and the non-domestic vacant rating exclusion. Preliminary discussions have already commenced, and we are particularly keen to work closely with councils to ensure an agreed and shared understanding of the work at hand. It is our intention to engage widely with all interested parties in gathering a robust evidence base upon which proposals can be based. Consultation on proposals for the small business rate relief and non-domestic vacant rating exclusions will take place during 25-26, and again, as this work develops, we will be happy to keep the committee apprised. As outlined by the Minister in a oral statement, the efficient and effective administration of the rates system is a significant lever in income generation and gives effect to policy decisions. Since 2014, the value of gross collectible rates that can be collected has increased by 32%, from 1.49 billion to 1.97 billion in 2024. This is in part attributable to rises in the annual rate poundage, but importantly is also because of an increased tax base, with growth in the valuation list from 849,000 in 2014 to 919,000 in 2024.
Just to crystallise that number, just for the purpose of anybody who's watching who isn't totally inducted, the 1.97 billion, so almost for rounding purposes, £2 billion is the sum that is raised in total and collected by LPS through the rate system. That's domestic, non-domestic, regional and district.
The gross of all rate assessments.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks. Sorry, go on.
In terms of rate collections, the departmental target on collection of gross collectible rates from 24-25 is set at 93%. In terms of value, that translates to 1.8 billion by 31st of March 2025. I'm pleased to advise the committee that despite a challenging financial backdrop, we are on track to achieve this target. Whilst there is still some months to go, there are a number of positive indicators on our progress. £1.4 billion of rates have already been discharged, with 50% of rates bills already paid in full. Of this, 179 million in rate relief and exclusions has been provided. The remaining 500 million to be collected is subject to ongoing action, with 50% being paid by an agreed payment plan, and the remaining 250 million relates to approximately 60,000 properties, and of these, nearly a third are already in payments. There are a wide range of individual circumstances on rate accounts that have rates still to be paid, including ongoing monthly awards of rate relief. Where payments are not being made, each account is scrutinised and, where appropriate, considered for legal actions. Collecting rates for the current billing period is clearly important, but we also remain focused on collection of all outstanding debt. You will have heard the Northern Ireland Audit Office report yesterday that at March 2024, 180.5 million unpaid rates was carried forward for collection in 24-25. The committee will be well aware of the challenges faced by ratepayers and LPS during the pandemic. As a consequence, we are managing the impact of increased levels of unpaid rates that have resulted from that period.
Just on unpaid rates, there was a reporting in September that 65 million had been, I think from a Assembly question from Michelle McAlveen perhaps, that 65 million had been written off over the last 5 years. That's 3 years, was it? So that was a stock of us. So that's the stock. What's the flow? Is it how much is it roughly per year? That's the stock. That's what's been written off. Roughly, how much are you kind of adding to the stock each year of unpaid?
So perhaps Chris, you
yeah, the last year's write-off rate was 16.9 million, of which 13.86 was legal, 3.28 or so was administrative. The stock, in terms of how do you mean? Do you
sorry, it's explain the difference between administrative and legal. I'll let you finish your
I'm going to come to some of that, Chair.
So do that. We'll let you finish your
I sense you're getting impatient with the length of this, but bear with me.
I'm not. I just always like to clarify a couple of bits of points from my own homework, because I'm
very happy to. And when I run through, if there are any points of clarification, clearly we will provide that detail. So just to cover again what I've said, 1.4 billion rates have already been discharged in full, so that's 50% of the rates bill. The remaining 250 million that is outstanding, 60% of the properties, that represents 60,000 properties, and a third are making payments. So that's a relatively positive position at this time of year. Going on to the outstanding debt, and the Audit Office, I was covering that in terms of the progress we've made there. So of the reported £180 million that was carried forward, this has now been reduced to 119 million at the 1st of December. So just in terms of our general approach to legacy debt collection, this seeks to maximise revenue collection and reduce revenue loss. Agreeing repayment arrangements that are affordable and sustainable for ratepayers ensures revenue is still collected, albeit at a slower pace, and revenue loss through write-off is reduced. So this is to your point, Chair, in terms of the write-offs. This can be evidenced on a reduction of loss through write-off, where the level of unpaid rates that were written off has reduced significantly from 31.6 million in 2014 to 16.9 million in 2024. Whilst at this point in the year we're in a good position to meet the collection targets, there will be continued and sustained effort required over coming months to ensure revenue raised is maximised. And I just want to finish on this point to say, although we're in a relatively good position on this, we are doubling down on our approach to collection of rates, and Chris and his team are thinking through a new debt collection strategy which we will bring forward in 2025, and again more than happy to come back to the committee to share the details of that. Finally, turning to valuation, in recent years LPS has established a process of more frequent revaluation exercises on non-domestic listings. An approach supported by business, the use of more timely information for rates assessment aligns with the Minister's ambition of a progressive rating system built on fairness and equity. With non-domestic revaluations in 2015, 2020, 2023 and now 2026, we have established a 3-yearly valuation cycle which is more frequent than any other part of the UK or Ireland. The 2026 non-domestic revaluation process is well underway, and the team are in the process of engaging with business ratepayers, requesting rates and market information which will be used to assess the new valuation. These will take effect in April 2026 based on an April 2024 valuation date. The intention is to have all 75,000 non-domestic properties revalued to allow a draft list to be published at the end of 2025. This will give ratepayers the opportunity to see the draft valuation before it becomes live in the following April 2026. In terms of domestic properties, again, the principle applies that more regular valuations restores fairness and supports property taxation that is progressive. The last revaluation for rating purposes came into effect back in April 2007, based on values at 2005. That's some 20 years ago. Much has happened, as you will appreciate, in that time. Current rates assessments are based on historical market values. The purpose of a domestic revaluation is to rebalance property taxation based on current market values and shifts. Whilst the decision on the timing of a domestic revaluation is a matter for the Executive, Minister Archibald has signalled her intention to bring a proposal recommending the year 2013. Whilst not preempting any decision of the Executive, if that date were to be agreed, up to 3 years lead-in would be required, with work commencing in 2027. That would be after the non-domestic revaluation in 2026.
Be clear that, just for the purpose of, that would be a revaluation of domestic revaluation in 2030, so it would be...
The process would begin in 2027.
And does that mean that the people, households would be being billed on 2027 values in 2030?
2028, it's usually a 2-year valuation date in advance of
in the same way that the people started being billed on 2005 values in 2007, people would be billed in 2030 on 2028 values.
If that's the decision
if that's the decision made by the
yeah.
Executive. Okay, that's
there's a point in time selected, and then the work is done.
Yes, you pick a date, and so on that date,
Exactly. And just to make the point, Chair and members, that's quite a significant piece of work, because clearly there's 850,000 roughly domestic properties, so it's 10 times the resource requirement on the non-domestic stock. Given the time lapse since the last exercise, though well ahead of that stage, so that 3 years and ahead, work will be required to put in place the appropriate resource, technology and technical requirements and training. So whilst the timelines for decision making are not yet finalised, given the scale and complexity of this project, an early decision from the Executive could be anticipated. The final area I wish to touch on before I close these opening remarks is in relation to the wider transformation project underway within LPS. The integration of services and systems has already enabled improvement. The flow of information and increased synergies between land registry, OSNI mapping, valuation and revenues and benefits has enabled a more responsive, customer-focused service offering, contributing to growth in the tax base and improvements in billing accuracy and legal recovery actions. To deliver our ministers and the broader Executive priorities in the longer term, LPS has embarked on a programme of change that will further integrate and modernise processes. The Minister's aims and objectives can only be achieved through underpinning organisational change across LPS, which includes digital transformation, new operational processes and the development of our capacity and capability. With this in mind, work is underway to develop a new strategic business plan for LPS. This will be developed in the next quarter and will set out our direction for the next 3 years. And again, I look forward to sharing those plans with the committee in due course.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a really helpful opening statement. And members, as always, I think several of you have indicated already you wish to ask a question. Should anybody else wish to ask a question, please indicate. I've got a few, and I think members will have lots of questions. Thank you again, Sharon and team. Just on some of what was discussed by the Minister in her statement earlier this week. Now, I recognise obviously some of these are still politically outstanding matters and there isn't executive agreement yet, but just to understand where we are with those issues, is a paper going to go to the exec? So has a paper... The paper hasn't gone to the Executive yet, so what was announced on Monday has not yet been discussed by the Executive. Is that...
So the paper has been put forward. It hasn't yet been able to be tabled at the Executive, but as the Minister has announced, we're moving to consultation, and as I've covered in my opening remarks, we will move to consultation early in the new year.
she's made the decision to proceed with her consultation subject to executive, because she's giving her indication of what she would like to do. Just on the detail of it, there are 2 specific short-term measures she has indicated she would like to proceed with. Now they're short-term, but they're not going to be, as it were, that short-term, because it's now legally impossible to do them in the next financial year, 25-26. So the earliest they could be done, subject to executive agreement, is 26-27.
That's correct.
So that's not so short-term. I still would meet some definitions of short-term, but just so I'm clear on the numbers, what I understanding from our discussions in the chamber, increasing the maximum capital value to 185,000 would raise about £4 million a year.
Across both the executive and the councils combined, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just interested in so it's not just for the executive, it would be for the council too, but that would be 4 million. And then on the rate relief for and the early discount would be 2 million. Is that right?
£4 million for the 2% reduction. Yeah.
Okay, so the 2% reduction would be 2. So, but the 2 specific measures would be collectively £6 million in the short
executive.
That's correct.
6 million for the executive, but there would be more, for a bit extra for local councils.
For the councils on the cap, and it's again due to the distribution of the cap. It's not all equally distributed across the 11 councils. Or some councils are affected more than others by that.
And remind me what the annual amount of unpaid rates is.
Annual, it finished at March 31st, 2024. It was 180.5 million.
That's the stock of unpaid.
That's all unpaid rates, all rates that were uncollected, which also includes an element of rates that were raised from January to March that the billing didn't allow ratepayers to pay.
It sort of puts it. This is me. I'm making an observation here. It puts the actual revenue raising of £6 million in some context when there's 180 million of unpaid rates. It slightly puts it in context as an actual revenue raising measure. Just on the.
So just to make that point. Chair, the 180 million is a cumulative impact, so covers many years, including over the. What I referred to earlier in terms of the collection in year is really important because already this year we're moving towards our 93% target. So what we're trying to do is maximise our in-year collection every year. We have historical debt, we're eating into that historical debt. But we're in a process where we're doubling down on that. So that's why there's so much energy and effort in getting in-year debt, which is quite a substantial amount of money. I appreciate that the 6 million sounds small in context, but this is the start of a process.
I totally agree, but just in the context of, so if 180 million is the stock, that's historic, it includes lots of presumably decades old unpaid rates, but the flow, how much per year? Even if you're at 93%, then 7% will still be, is it between 10 and 15 million? Did you know?
No, I don't understand your question.
So, for example, what's the average unpaid in a year?
So last year, the current year, unpaid was in around about the 50 million. Now, I would need to confirm that figure. It's
50.
50 million of the 23-24 rates for that year.
Did you say 50, 50, 51, 5?
50, 0, 50. 50.
Okay.
50.
Again,
I would need to confirm that, Chair.
It's just really me making the point. I'm not asking necessarily you guys to confirm it, but it is important to draw the contrast. We're talking about this is it's being presented as a significant rates revenue measure. £6 million versus 50 million unpaid rate. I think the public kind of need to have that context.
I don't think as well, the Minister isn't, in terms of what she's been saying, she isn't necessarily saying that it's, I think she said that it's not significant in terms of revenue terms. Her wider aim for the system and in terms of the strategic review cycle that she's starting into is to make the whole system more progressive and
exactly.
And
okay.
fair.
I do want to come on to that before.
In the context of the 6 million as well, I mean, there are measures that we have in the system that are seen as very important measures. For example, sport and recreation relief costs £4.7 million. So with the 6 million that you save in one area, you can do quite significant things in terms of.
Lots of these are important things. I think the early discount thing is sensible, and for on the strategic review cycle, the statement isn't clear. This is always an interesting philosophical question. When does a cycle end? So this is a review cycle, but I didn't see an end date.
No, she said it's for 10-year cycle.
It's a 10-year cycle. No. Sorry, there is a 10-year cycle. That's quite a long cycle. I suppose the question is in terms of the review cycle, does that mean that it'll be 10 years before fundamental reform, or does it mean that you're looking at that? Just explain, I suppose, what that 10 year cycle.
The rationale behind the 10-year cycle is so that every single, she wants to do a real deep dive on every single rate and policy measure that's in place at the moment in terms of support mechanisms, and as that process is prioritised and evolved, then adjustments can be made elsewhere in the system, both within the actual measure themselves, but also, as you said in the chamber, in terms of if there are savings to be made, the Minister would be very keen to reapply those in some way throughout the system. So as we progress towards the end of the 10-year cycle, you will start to see quite considerable change throughout the system as more reliefs are added to that review process.
Chair, if I could just add, the 10 years is to allow, as Andrew says, an in-depth review of all of the rates reviews. In terms of the radical nature of that will be a matter for the executive. What we want to do is take forward in a very considered way. Yeah. So the announcement of the Minister was to signal her intention to look at every single part of rates review, because as you will know, there are many calls on rates relief. There are many calls on rates and rates relief in terms of the pressures and challenges faced by civic society, business society and others at the minute. So this is her intention in a very sustained and deliberate way to say this will take time, but how radical it is will ultimately come down to the executive in terms of the decisions that are made on a case-by-case basis. Okay. So I wouldn't like you to think that it will take 10 years for the radical nature to land. Sure. It depends along the way what is considered and the nature of the decisions that have been made.
I appreciate that. I'm still slightly unclear as to what a 10-year cycle means, in the sense that I don't think there's ever been an executive minister, with the possible exception of Martin McGuinness, First Minister, who's lasted 10 years in a job. It's pretty uncommon for senior people in departments to last 10 years in a job. I suppose the question I'm asking is about the viability of saying this is a 10-year process, and if it's a cycle, the analogy of a cycle is that it goes round like that, rather than it's this thing that starts there and finishes there with a different. So I guess I'm trying to ask you to explain to me where we're actually going with this, rather than round in a circle.
It's a very reasonable question. And, I've been in public service a long time. I don't think I've ever lasted through any cycle of anything, for a lot less than 10 years. However, the Minister's clear that there needs to be a process. Okay. She's put a time frame on that, and I think, it's the ambition to look at all of the elements of rating relief that's important at this point.
Okay, it still feels like a very long time period to me, but in any case, it's time for that. Speaking of long time periods, I've asked quite a few questions, so it's now Vice Chair Diana Forsyth.
Chair, and thanks very much for coming. Welcome, Sharon, and congratulations on the appointment.
Thank you.
Just a couple of things. Based on what you said, the 93% target for collection every year, how is that set and how often is that reviewed?
So that's actually quite a new process, as I understand it. So that's the target for this year, which was a stretch target on the year before. And we'll be now in the new year starting to speak to the Minister and across the department about what's an appropriate level that's challenging but achievable for 25-26. And again, happy to come back and engage with the committee in that regard.
Well, that's good to know that it's not just,
no, it's not static by any means.
It's an aspirational. Yeah. No, that's great to hear. I want to ask you around the National Fraud Initiative. I'd put a couple of questions in that probably have come through yourselves via the Minister as well. Just in terms of the rates, the 2024 exercise identified 103 cases of rates avoidance compared to only 8 cases in the previous cycle, which was over £270,000. So a good bit of that has been able to be recovered, but there's still quite a bit outstanding. So just in terms of the fact that the National Fraud Initiative had to come in and do that initiative of data matching, is LPS doing anything to investigate or try to detect rates avoidance themselves as a part of their normal processes, or is it only when the external audit comes in?
Absolutely not. Only when the external audit comes in. You wouldn't expect me to say anything different from that. We welcome actually the work with the National Fraud Institute, and we have responded positively on that. I'm going to ask Chris maybe to cover in broad terms what we're doing on the fraud piece more generally.
Yeah, so we actually have engaged with them with the NFI for quite a number of years. Last year we provided the NFI with in and around 840,000 records from our database that was going into their database to do that data matching. We also then engage them thereafter and identify areas of highest risk and those cases where we ourselves have struggled to get repair information and details to allow us to bill accurately. This is where the National Fraud Initiative have added and supplemented the work that we do. So we very much welcome what they bring to the table. We would actually look again next year or at the next round to try and refine that again further into those even more difficult cases. So the National Fraud Initiative can data match against a number of different databases that we don't have access to. They can data match to the likes of the full electoral register. Now, that doesn't determine, just because you're on the electoral register doesn't determine your liability for rates, but it gives us a good indication of a person who is residing in a property who we could bill correctly. So that's where the benefit of having the National Fraud investigations and that data matching supplement what we do. We also look at the likes of benefit fraud and any frauds against our reliefs. The National Fraud NFI also do that work for us. So we use them as a third party source. It's not that we're waiting on them coming in and finding stuff. We're actually proactively using them.
That's really good to hear, just in terms of, as the chair had outlined, with the high levels of, of unpaid debt, the write-offs. It's just good to have a feeling of confidence that LPS are taking every step possible to make sure that those are being billed are due to pay. In the Minister's statement, where she is reviewing, talking about the comprehensive review of small business rate relief and scope for enhanced sectoral targeting and application, I wonder, have you got any more information around what the intention is on that?
So I'll let Andrew cover in some more detail in terms of the engagement we've already done and what's planned, but clearly the SBRR covers many different sectors, and there is a call from all of those businesses in terms of additional support. Part of the considerations moving forward is how we engage with each sector to understand their particular pressures and challenges and how that impacts in terms of the potential for policy changes moving forward. Andrew, would you like to add anything further on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a process that really is sort of accelerated almost since the autumn budget as well, and the impact of that. But at the moment, the Small Business Rate Relief Scheme is really blanket application. It applies to an NAV level of under £15,000 and applies to every property class. So part of what the Chancellor had announced in Westminster at the autumn budget was that for April 26, she is looking at sort of transforming business rates, and as part of that process, they are looking at separate multiplier categories. There's a poundage multiplier that's applied to the property value for different categories of or different sectors within the economy. So she has outlined retail, hospitality, leisure as three that would fall within that process. There's not all the detail isn't available on that yet because it's quite a way off, but the structural issue with the poundage and what they're doing in terms of it's a uniform business rate that's applied in GB. We don't have that here. We collect the district rate and the regional rate combined as one, so we won't have that option open to us. So part of the scope of the small business rate review will be looking at, well, could the small business rate relief do that sort of allow for a similar process to the poundage reductions that are being applied on a sectoral basis in GB. Obviously, we've been engaging in quite a lot of detail with the different sectors and representatives over the last few weeks. I know that they were up in front of the committee with your party colleague just last week, and I think a joint meeting in terms of especially the hospitality sector. They have arranged for a joint meeting between the Economy Minister and Finance Minister in the new year, but at official level we've already met with them to look at the challenges that are unique to that sector. Scotland decided that they were going to target hospitality but not retail and leisure. So again, in terms of the sort of process, what we hope to do is the cost of doing business research that the Minister referred to, that's to get up and running pretty sharpish, and then into the sort of structural review of the small business rate relief to sort of build on that straight away, you know.
Thank you. And in terms of the sectoral targeting, would there be, whenever you're going forward, would there be an engagement list of which sectors there are, or just the ones that you referred to, the hospitality, the retail, the leisure? Because obviously there's other sectors, like, you know, there's the childcare sector, there's different ones. I just would be keen to know which sectors you're looking at to consider targeting to be able to feed back on.
30,000 businesses benefited from SBRR across many sectors, and part of our clear intention on behalf of the Minister moving forward is to engage as broadly and deeply as possible, Diane.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And just one final one, I just wonder, you know, have the EU state aid rules got any bearing on the levels of support that could in theory be provided going forward?
So not technically for the small business rate relief scheme. It's more likely to fall within the new UK subsidy rules, but yes, there will be subsidy control conditions there. And what I've been speaking to the officials in the Department for Economy that sort of lead on the guidance in that area, as well as policy counterparts in GB. There are issues if you want to target a specific sector in terms of specificity of support, and we need to abide by the rules in relation to that. For other sectors that are outside the small business rate relief, there's slightly different considerations. Manufacturing more likely to still fall within the old state aid rules because it's more likely to impact competition between member states.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Steve Aiken.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. Thanks very much. Just two things. One, how important for Reval 2030? Obviously, we've heard a lot about digital transformation and where Nova sits within that and the rest of it. And I know that Neil Permsec is very keen on concerns about, you know, not having Ordnance Survey, LPS and Land Registry all being able to talk to each other, not having the same digital space. And obviously, Project Nova has had a bit of a checkered sort of career so far. Where are we on that, and how essential is that for your delivery of Reval 2030?
Not essential for the delivery in terms of the transformation process. Clearly, you know, it is important that we maximise the benefits of the disparate parts of LPS coming together, and the digital piece is a key enabler of that. Nova is an overarching name, and there's a number of different aspects of it, and you probably know this, so stop me if I'm repeating myself.
You always get very nervous when anybody talks about sort of LPS and digital and contracts. Which is, we've been here, we wear the battle scars.
Yeah.
Not as much as you do, but we do.
Yes, when I was looking at the LPS strategy and what was supposed to be delivered in line with that, I was starting to get nervous as well, but you know, I suppose part of what we want to do is ensure that we are clear about our programme management, about our contract management, and that we manage our delivery partners well. Things happen outside of our control, and you know, you've heard some of that quite recently in terms of delivery partners and how things can go wrong, but it's incumbent on us and me in particular as the head of LPS to make sure that we manage that position well.
We're looking at a traffic light scheme. What colour is it at the moment? On
a project basis, there's certainly, you know, not green, certainly not green in terms of some of the contract arrangements which we are working through. But I think that is a positive piece because we have recognised the challenges and we are finding a way through that. In terms of the benefits to be realised, we're very clear that we will only continue with contracts if they will deliver on the benefits that we have set out. So there is no point in investing the money if we are going to end up with the same arrangements at the end of this.
Okay, thanks for that. Obviously, we'll be taking a very close interest as this goes forward because, you know, we've had your predecessors in front of us before and sort of we've all been in this whole digital space piece.
I look forward to that.
It is. But again, it's something like we're here to help.
Indeed.
We're not here to be, you know, we can be critical friends in this, but, you know, we realise what the problems are. But, you know, this seems to be crucial for the way LPS is going to do its business in the future. And I just have there are already sort of concerns here being raised here, and we are beginning to see concerns about the project.
And I appreciate that, and welcome your offer of help. We're excited about the change we want to deliver on this, and we're frustrated that it hasn't moved as quickly as we can. I think Angela
Well,
wants
I was
to
just
point.
going to say, in terms of Nova being tied closely with the delivery of revaluations, it will be in the future. It will be, a game changer for us, but it doesn't prevent us from delivering on revaluations at this point in time. We've already delivered 4 non-domestic revaluations without Nova. We're just about to do the next one in 2026. We will be able to do a one in 2030, despite whether Nova is there or it isn't there.
Neil was putting a lot of emphasis on they needed the digital transformation across the Department of Finance and in particular in LPS to be able to achieve the aims.
Well, in terms of optimising things, but there's already an awful lot of work that goes on within the existing systems that we have. Use of Ordnance Survey, use of land registry data, etc., etc. It goes on now day and daily as it is. The Nova will change things going forward, but it doesn't prevent those good cross working taking place already.
So and there's no concerns about land registry, the digitisation process, matching in with ONS, and that those problems have been solved?
In terms of, I'm talking in terms of revaluations, which doesn't necessarily use land registry. We don't use land registry data on that.
So in terms of each of the parts of it, each project is at a different stage. There are concerns with some of the projects which we're working through, but the integration that Neil refers to is the game changer for us in the
maybe with the
medium
indulgence
to
of the
long term.
chair, maybe if we could, just one of the things, we could get a quick update or an update where the various projects are to come to the committee.
We're happy to do a separate
Thanks
briefing on
very
that
much
of it.
Okay, we'll keep a note of that for a round up the end.
Thanks very much, Chair.
Okay, Philip Brett is next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all. Sharon, congratulations on your new appointment. Your predecessors were excellent public servants, and I've no doubt you will be as well. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. The statement that you read at the start, is that approved by the Department, or is that drafted by the Department for Finance, or is that drafted by yourselves?
Drafted by myself.
Drafted by yourself, okay. So the words that were used were just about aligning with the Minister's priorities of reform of rates around based on fairness and equity. Do you think it's both fair and equitable that we give discount to those people in Northern Ireland who can afford to pay the rates bills early, and we use public money to subsidise that when there are many constituents in North Belfast who don't have the money to pay the rates off in one go, and they are then penalised financially and have to pay more than those who have the financial ability to pay the rates all in one go?
I think that's a very reasonable question, Philip. I think my response would be until we undertake the review of each of the rate reliefs, we don't know how fair and equitable it is for any. That's why we're looking at every single relief on a single deep dive basis, and that's why we will engage with this committee, with your constituents and with as many stakeholders as possible to come to an informed view about how we make the system more fair and more equitable moving forward.
That's a 10-week consultation in terms of the initial reduction from a 4% discount to a 2% discount?
We haven't, the Minister hasn't decided on whether it's 10 weeks, but it'll be 10 or 12 weeks.
She might be tempted to go for, we were originally thinking 10 weeks, she might be tempted to go for a 12-week
A little
period.
bit
Is that
longer
something in the
rather than...
statement?
She did say 10
She
in the
did.
statement, yeah, but she's thinking maybe we might go for the 12 weeks in the new year. In terms of the question, obviously we undertook the previous consultation last year, or earlier on this year, it closed, in terms of the early payment discount and the full removal of it. So I would say in terms of we got both views back. The view that you've referred to was quite prevalent in the consultation responses. Other people framed it around the fact that they budget all year round to sort of save up in advance almost to pay the avail of the discount. So I think those are the type of issues that we wanted to do the supplementary consultation on, and work certainly in terms of the impact assessment work, to try to sort of work on with some of the sectoral organisations and things like that to sort of dive a little bit deeper into that before any final decisions are made in that area.
So there will be so the consultation is only on reducing it by 2%, it's not completely removing it. So we'll continue.
That's the preferred policy option, but while we're doing that, we're going to look at some sub-options and within that as well. Yeah.
So we will continue, regardless of the outcome, the preferred policy position of the Minister is that we will continue to subsidise, using public money, those who can afford to pay the rates all off.
It's a reduction in the first instance, but with a view to seeing then how that plays out in terms of ratepayer behaviour. So I think it's maybe prudent of the Minister to take that view to reduce it in the first instance and then take it from there.
And then just there was a lot of figures bandied about, so apologies that I was slow to try and pick them up. So the Chair was referencing a figure of 180 as on the balance sheet in terms of what is historically owed to LPS. I think, maybe I picked you up wrong, Sharon, you quoted the figure of 148 million. What is on the current balance sheet in terms of how outstanding?
So the 180 was the carried forward figure at the turn of the 24-25 year. At 1st of December, that had reduced then to 119.
119. So that's the current outstanding figure
Of the legacy debt, including this year.
Yeah, so at the moment there's approximately £500 million still to be collected this year. That includes the carried forward rates from previous years, which is approximately 119 million. So in total, we don't collect it indifferently. We collect as a collective. Everything is subject to collection again from the start of April. So at the moment, there's roughly around about £500 million still to collect. And
it's all instalment payments.
Instalment payments, still awards of relief that still gets paid monthly, and that's still to be attributed.
So how did we get to the figure of 119? So 180 was the historic figure, and then the paper says reduced prior year rates by 34.1 million. So 180 million take 34 million. Where does the rest of the income come down to?
The briefing paper was at a point in time, but we've moved on from there. So as at the 1st of December, the current position is that the £180 million that was there at the 1st of April is now reduced down to 119 million through our collection activities.
Presumably the December payment lift is coming in that.
Yeah.
So the December payment lift has brought us from 144 million down to 119 million.
What was your first figure there?
So we're saying the figure was 148 million. The paper then says that was brought down by 34.1 million. Then I'm just trying to work out how we then got down to 119 million.
That would be the
Yeah, so in total, £505 million. That's the figure as at the 1st of December that is still due for collection, of which 386 million is current year, and prior years is 119 million.
If you could maybe just write with updated figures on that, because it's maybe just my brain's unable to compute.
Philip, it is quite difficult. It's taken me some time to get my head around it, so I'm more than happy to clarify any point.
And then finally, just in relation to non-domestic vacant rating. So that discount is helping encourage blight on high streets and town centres right across Northern Ireland, in my opinion. The Minister gave passing reference to that in her statement, and I believe she recognises the impact that's having on high streets and town centres. What work are you doing on that, Andrew?
So there's two elements to the non-domestic vacant rating bit. There's the liability level, which is 50%, and then there's the exclusion level as well. So and to take them one at a time, in terms of the percentage liability level, the Minister was outlining that she is quite tempted to increase the liability level. As part of the previous consultation, the feedback that we got was, look, after the pandemic, there's a lot of office space, retail space that's just very, very difficult to let out due to changes in consumer behaviour and property use. So she is working to couple the sort of increase in liability and time it alongside kind of regeneration initiatives and capital grant funding in other areas, including partnership working with councils, so that it's not just an increase in the liability hitting those businesses cold, or the people that own those properties cold, that they will at least be afforded the opportunity to try to sort of bring the property up to spec in terms of the current rental market. In terms of the exclusion side of things, then it's a review of things like the 3-month rule, where you get a grace period before the liability kicks in terms of listed buildings, where occupation is prohibited in terms of particular premises, and tightening up some of the legislation around that. So those two things will probably move forward in tandem, but in terms of the strategic review element of it, it's on the NDVR exclusions in the first instance. I think the increase in liability is probably going to be a sort of slightly longer term thing as that capital grant funding starts to come on stream.
There'll be no immediate move on that?
No immediate moves on that. I think if we brought that in, actually, you might there's an equal risk that you could increase the blight, because you might have either deliberate dereliction of a property, or you just people throwing away the keys to the property because they're not valuable to them in any way at that point. So it's just something that we want to carefully manage. But
there's no such discount in liability for domestic vacant properties?
No, none for domestic. There's full liability for domestic at the moment. In terms of the wider work, I am kind of working with some of the district councils at the moment, and trying to get it across all 11. But certainly there's quite a lot of work going on at district council level to sort of couple up their regeneration powers and grant funding at a small level to try to pair up the sort of small grant funding that they can give with the Back in Business scheme to try to put the two together and maximise the value from the two. So at the moment that work started with Belfast City Council, Mid and East Antrim, and I'm going to Newry, Morningdown in the new year to do the same there, and I'm hoping to get around all 11. But I do think that there's quite a lot of potential there for using those two things together.
Just finally from me, Chair, obviously there's a housing crisis right across Northern Ireland. Has there been any thought given by the Minister about increasing the rates liability on vacant or empty domestic properties to try and encourage those who have allowed empty properties or derelict properties that families could move into to lie vacant?
Increasing the level beyond 100%, presumably. It has been looked at in the past. There's two concerns that we have with that. It's similar to the second home issue and increasing the liability on second homes, is that I think, and Chris, you'll know this from the operational end, but I think people would just tell you it was occupied, or throw furniture into it or something. It's the main one to the increased charge on the empty side. On the second home side, which would increase the housing supply potentially as well, I think it's been tried in Wales. It's not been a complete success in that it had some effect on the property market there, so we're watching that carefully, but there might be some scope for that. You agree with that comment?
Yeah, so the property would just become occupied. A property doesn't have to be occupied by a person. It can be occupied by other personal possessions. So what we would find is that people start furnishing empty properties.
As long as there's a benefit to it,
Would it not be possible to draft a law in such a way as to make clear that there had to be a test I don't know, I'm just theoretic. I mean, perhaps it's not for you to answer, but I suppose you could theoretically change the law to ensure that as Mr. Brad said, that there was a liability for a property that was for X period of time or after X date empty. That would be possible.
I think it would be definitely possible to draft the law. I don't know whether it would be possible to enforce it. Would be.
It's the enforcement.
Okay, just before I bring in Nicola Brogan, who's next, one quick question, because we talked about this question of vacant, the easing or the reforms of vacant property, even the non-domestic side, and how it fits in with other work around regeneration. We were
Yes.
talking about one aspect of this, and indeed we've talked about it with LPS before, specifically in relation to Tribeca and other areas of dereliction or the places that are languishing. And in some cases I've had, certainly in the case of Tribeca, there are properties that have had that have received rates relief, and for some places have been off the ratings list. While, but in any case, is there also work going on with other? So is there? I get the sense that there's work going on a bit within LPS on this stuff you've just talked about. There's a dilapidation bill, which the ERA minister is due to be bringing forward. We were due to have it already. Are you looking at that? Is there any work going on with the team doing that in ERA?
Primarily, the work that I've been doing has been working with the councils. In Belfast, in particular, we're looking at the main thoroughfare there through Donegal Place, Royal Avenue, and they're surveying at Belfast City Council level the use above the commercial units on the ground floor. Yeah. And they're surveying the owners of those properties using the LPS data. They've been able to approach the owners and say, what's the main barriers to you occupying these properties or bringing them back into use for residential? Now, at the moment, I don't think anybody would be surprised to hear that it is the water element of things and the planning. But what we're exploring it with them for is the issue around whether any new written policy could be put in place either for, and the Minister referred to this in her statement, in terms of developer exclusions after they develop the property but before it becomes occupied, to de-risk the holding period for them if they build it until it gets occupied. The other thing is if a first occupier discount to incentivise the occupation and people coming in.
Okay, you say water. I mean, but if these are existing properties, are they not? They must be connected to mains.
Doesn't necessarily mean that they'll. Yeah.
Use.
There's quite an extensive session on that from the Construction Employers Federation at the DFI committee, which might be worth.
Every day's a school day. Okay, Nicola Brogan.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks everybody for your presentation. And Sharon, congratulations to you on your new role. Certainly a very busy and interesting time for you to come on board with, I suppose, the Minister's announcements this week as well. Would you maybe like to outline what your priorities are as you've taken on the head of the LPS?
Thanks, Nicola, and you're right. A very interesting time to join LPS. I guess I probably covered these in my opening remarks. Clearly, with the Minister's announcement, it will be my priority to make sure that I lead the team in terms of bringing forward a programme of work that allows consultation on the rate reliefs that is as broad-ranging and as collaborative as we can in order to bring evidence-based proposals to the Minister and ultimately to the Executive for a decision. So that will be a key priority for me. Equally, and I've just discussed this in terms of transformation, it is important that I lead LPS into the next phase of its organisational journey. We're excited about the possibilities for LPS moving forward. It has been a challenging number of years, and I understand that both staff and others have outlined here are frustrated by the stop-start nature of the transformation. But we want to breathe some light into that again, breathe some air into the lungs, and part of that is to look at a revised strategic plan for the next 3 years, which will steer the work of the team here and the broader LPS team moving forward. So lots to do, but we're very much looking forward to it all.
Thank you for that, Sharon. And listen, I wish you all the best. There's obviously going to be a very busy time for you, but I do wish you the best. In regards to the Minister's programme for reviewing rating reliefs, in your opinion, how radical is it? And I know you just talked about there about consultation and collaborative working, but how are you going to bring about these proposals and ensure that they're evidence-based and that you are taking views of stakeholders into account when you're developing them?
So, what I would say, it's a very ambitious programme of work, and we've talked about the time frame over 10 years, whether it takes 10 years, whether it's longer than that, you know, who's to say, but it is our clear determination to bring the changes forward, to bring the considerations forward as quickly as possible. What I can do, as I've just set out in terms of my priorities, is support the process in a very considered way, and that is by looking at the broader engagement, not just the voices that we hear loudly, but also those voices that aren't heard through our normal engagements. There is huge interest in this area, and any change is impactful. There will be potential winners and potential losers in anything that you look at. So we're very clear of our responsibilities as civil servants to advance this in a way that is considered, that is collaborative, and that is evidence-based. And we will look at research, we will look at other jurisdictions, we will look at the broadest ranges of options as you could expect. In terms of how radical it is, I think I discussed this with the chair earlier. That would be very much dependent on executive decisions and also the timeliness of those decisions. So all we can do is bring the proposals with the evidence base for the executive for consideration.
Thank you for that, Sharon. Andrew, can I ask you already discussed there the Minister proposing the consultation for the early payment discount and the max cap, hopefully now going for 12 weeks. When do you suppose the publication or the consultation will be open to the public?
We want to get that up and running by the middle of January, and as part of that process we want to also make sure we're engaging with the committee as we go through the cycle on that.
Fair enough, so end of January for that. And just finally, on the domestic reevaluation, so the last one, Sharon, you'd said was carried out in 2007. So how important is it that we have this reevaluation now, I suppose, and what impact will that have? There's been many changes since 2007 and obviously huge economic changes, so maybe you just want to outline the impact that this will have potentially.
So I'll maybe let Angela, who leads on this, cover this in a little bit more detail. Clearly it's an executive decision, so we can't get ahead of that. But from my perspective, having up-to-date, relevant information as timely as possible absolutely underpins taxation that is fair and that is equitable. And it seems to me that 20 years lapse in a post-COVID environment seems to be a very different world than what came before. Yeah. Angela, do you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, that's essentially what the purpose is for revaluation. So the legislation allows for ongoing maintenance of the current valuation list, but it also allows for revaluations as well. And the purpose of the revaluations is really just to rebase the values so that a tax that's raised on historic values, especially ones as you get further away from the valuation date, the anomalies start to creep in terms of the distribution and where the fairness is sitting in the current values. So the very purpose of a revaluation is to rebase those values so that the tax is raised on current up-to-date values. But we've moved in that direction in terms of more frequent revaluations on the non-domestic side. It tends to be that the domestic happens less frequently, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it is something that should be carried out probably more frequently than 20 years, but we are where we are now, so it is something that is necessary in terms of a progressive and fair rating system.
Previous to 2007, it was, I think, 1976. So the time frame's getting a little bit shorter.
Getting a wee bit nearer. Okay. Thanks very much for that. Appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, next, Owen Tennyson.
Thank you, Chair, and Sean, just to add my congratulations on the new post. Sticking first of all with the short-term changes that the Minister outlined on Monday, was it always the intention to consult on those short-term measures, or is consultation happening in lieu of a paper being tabled for decision at the Executive?
So it would always be the intention to consult. The executive paper was to engage with the broader executive, given the nature of the change and given the impact right across the executive. It wasn't necessary, but it was part of that broader collaboration engagement that the Minister wanted to bring forward. But to be clear, consultation on any change was always planned and will be required for any of the changes moving forward.
And just, you've said it's required. Legally, is it required, given that consultations happened under the direction of the Secretary of State on total removal of the reliefs?
Consultation was broader under the Secretary of State, and it gave us a level of information. What we're moving now to are proposals that we want to test broader views on. So it would have been wrong to move ahead with decisions or with firm proposals for executive decision on the basis of the first consultation, which was very, very helpful in terms of informing our Minister's first view of moving forward, but we need to explore that in more detail.
Fair enough, thank you, Sharon. And you covered some of this ground with the Chair and his initial questions, but in terms of the 10-year strategic review cycle, just at a very basic level, I mean, why does it take 10 years? I mean, is that a political decision? Is that based on advice in terms of capacity within LPS? What is the driving force for that being 10 years?
I guess when you look at the range of rate reliefs that we have, in the two that we're bringing forward at the minute, we had the consultation which finalised at the start of this year, to bring forward another consultation, and the range and breadth of evidence and views that we need to take to put forward proposals on that. Part of it is to do with capacity, part of it is to do with the extensive nature of this work, but there's also, I guess, the piece about how much of this can be, how much engagement on each of those in an in-depth way can be carried out at any point in time. So, as I've said earlier, the 2010 is the Minister's stated time frame. If we can do that quicker, we will. It is our clear ambition to support the Minister in advancing this as quickly as possible, but at this point the planning assumption is that it will take some time to work through all of these complex matters in order that we come out with proposals and policy decisions that work.
Oh, okay. And I mean, it's not a direct comparison because it looked at a slightly narrower set of reliefs, but the Barclay Review in Scotland looked specifically at non-domestic reliefs, and I think that reported it was certainly under 2 years and maybe was in and around a year. If we sought to set up an independent review, would there be potential that that could happen more quickly? And from your perspective, would there be merit in that as opposed to the approach that's being undertaken?
So Andrew will maybe cover this in more detail, but we have had reviews, independent reviews in 2007, 12, 16, 17, 19 and the broader review this year. What we're looking at specifically here with this, with the cycle that the Minister is referring to, is specific in-depth reviews on each of the rate reliefs that's in place at the minute. So it's a slightly different piece of work. And look specifically at those rate reliefs and those policy decisions that are already extant. Some of the changes that we've made in the past in terms of the broader rate reliefs has been, for example, the frequency that was referred to in the non-domestic revals. So we've now got that into the cycle of the 3 years. So it's a different level of consultation that we're undertaking.
I accept that because previous reviews have looked at the rating system and this is looking specifically at rating reliefs, and there is a distinction there, but my understanding is that the Barclay Review in Scotland did look at the rating reliefs. I guess my concern is, and I'd be interested in reviewing this, Sharon, is that, I mean, if you even consider the last 10 years, the socio-economic environment in 2014 is very different to the environment today. So we could be in a position where you review, 2 or 3 reliefs in a year, and by the time you get to the end of the cycle, you're reviewing reliefs that those same businesses are potentially interacting with or are affected by, but in a completely different environment. So I'm concerned at how holistic a review can be if it's happening over a 10-year cycle rather than a short review, and would suggest that actually a better way to divide up the work is to take one look at non-domestic, do that over a period of time, and then look separately at domestic because they affect different subsets of society. So I am concerned, and I have to put that on record, that the long time scale may not be effective, and we are told often on this committee that, well, the rating system has been reviewed many times before. but clearly if the Minister believes a 10-year review cycle is necessary, none of those previous reviews have been sufficient.
I'm not sure I would agree that none of the previous reviews have been sufficient. To your point, things change and things need to be kept under constant review. So what was agreed in previous policy decisions were right at that point in time. In terms of looking at everything, all of the rate reliefs at one time, that would be a significant and complex piece of work. And the first consultation had a first look at that in broad terms. But these are very complex matters, and I absolutely accept your point, Owen, in terms of by the time you get round to review again, things will have changed quite significantly. And I think as we move forward in this piece of work, we will need to be cognizant of change, and we will need to keep under review what we look at. We haven't set out a clear programme for those 10 years, and I think at the start of every year or throughout the year we will need to consider what we do and how we do it.
I appreciate that. And just one final question. Sure. Sorry, Andrew, I know you want to come in.
No, I was just going to say, in terms of, obviously that 10-year cycle is being undertaken, but it doesn't preclude us from doing other work alongside it. You know, if there are interventions that need to be made through the system, but I do think, and you've acknowledged it yourself, just in terms of that big bang approach, looking at all non-domestic, all domestic, that has been done before. It is starting to yield the same results as the issue that we face, and we want to do that more evidence-based deep dive on the individual policies. Just on the Barclay review, so we undertook a rating review 2018-19, all on non-domestic. It was a very thorough process, but a lot of the recommendations from the Barclay review were then implemented on foot of that. And a lot of the stuff, although it was looking at business rates, they were also looking at things like, you know, how can you have uniform billing across the different council areas in Scotland, things like that. But to tie in with the transformation bit and the sort of unique nature of LPS, because we have a lot of that integrated services already, it means that a lot of those recommendations from the Barclay process were already in place here.
No, I appreciate it, Andrew. That's helpful. Thank you. And just one final question, because it's something whenever I speak to businesses, they always raise with me, so it'd be remiss of me not to put it to LPS, and that is the perception that this is the department in LPS marking its own homework. So what assurance can you give that there will be sufficient independent analysis and input into the strategic review cycle?
So I hope I've covered this to some degree. In terms of the process that I will oversee, it's my job as a civil servant to be impartial. It's my job to engage as broadly as I can. It's my job to bring evidence-based recommendations that take the fullest account of the views that we have heard to our Minister, in order for the Minister and ultimately the Executive to take a view. I have no agenda in this, nor has LPS. It is in our interest to bring forward policy changes or policy recommendations that best meet the needs of the broader public. Otherwise, we will continue to be in this cycle.
No, thank you. Appreciate that, Sharon.
Thank you,
Chair.
All through.
You just on that point with regards to Owen's question around the previous consultation on the revenue raising, and I do take the point that that revenue raising consultation was picking on relief, the 7 aspects of that. Sharon, you did say that it was helpful, but what we now have is, in the 1 year of a 10-year plan, you've actually picked on the 2 reliefs that energised the public the most. And actually, when you look at the submissions, had the most support in retention. The early payment discount, 985 supported the retention, 210 opposed. The maximum capital value, 967 supported retention, 232 opposed. So how was it helpful when you've actually picked on the 2 that gained the most support?
So Andrew maybe cover this in a little more detail. What I would say, Paul, is it was the Minister's ambition to bring forward change as quickly as possible. There was reference made earlier to early changes, and had we been able to go out to consultation earlier in this year, it would have been the Minister's ambition to think about implementation from next year. So in many ways, these two measures were ones that the Minister could bring forward to start the change process. We have to start somewhere. And these, as you have just pointed out, were relatively welcomed in terms of the consultation.
Yeah, they were supported in the consultation to keep retention.
I was just going to add, I mean, as you said, it was looking at revenue raising, so both of them looked at, if the choice was binary in terms of is it removal or is it retain, there was a majority in favour of retain. So the two options that the Ministers put forward aren't remove or retain. It is sort of a preferred option within that, and then sub options underneath that within the consultation that we're planning on taking. In terms of even though in terms of the principle of doing it, when you consult, you're looking at the substantive content, obviously, that you're getting back in the points that people are raising, and then you go away with that and you look at other sources of evidence and comparisons with other jurisdictions and things like that. So it's not always just a majority vote or with a greater number wins the day. In terms of that, you're looking at the substantive issues, but
they're
in
quite
terms
stark. They're quite stark with regards.
they are, but I mean, I think you'll see across all the domestic issues, it's people are more incensed to write in about things that they feel are being removed from them. In terms of the percentage of properties, there's 800,000 odd properties in the domestic tax base. 8,000 of them fall into the cap bracket, so it's 1% of people that are affected there.
Just on the early payment discount, how many households would avail of that?
163,000 last year.
160.
It's 18.7% of the payment.
So I would take a different view to my colleague here with regards to the reward for early payment. I do think that the department is hitting low-hanging fruit. It's an easy 4 million to raise. I believe that 4 million is far better in the savings of our people rather than in an inefficient government department to spend. Would it not be better for LPS to energise themselves in tackling the 73,500 households that don't pay any rates or don't pay all the rates, rather than going after prompt payment?
Maybe if I can cover that, Paul. As I hope I've covered in my opening remarks and in the discussion earlier, we are absolutely interested in collecting rates and collecting the full value of rates. We're equally energised and clearly determined to collect the legacy debt, so that's one part of it. In terms of the policy changes, we have no view of those personally. They're matters for the Minister and for the Executive. And what we will do, and what I will do in that part of LPS, through Andrew and the team, is develop those proposals for Executive's termination. So whilst they come together, I want to be very clear that the role of debt collection remains paramount and will continue regardless. The policy changes and the rate reliefs moving forward will be a matter for the Executive, and we will administer and collect and make those as efficient as possible once those decisions are made.
You talked about the 180.5 million of unpaid rates, which is down, I think I read it right, to 119.
Yes.
119. You did talk about a 50 million. I think the chair put you over that. I take it that's in-year amount.
That's the amount that we've been collecting. So we've reduced through our billing and collection activities. We've reduced the value of the debt that was carried forward by that amount.
Right. Okay.
So it's all part of our collection.
So you can understand the angst that people will feel when you've got this massive layer of and level of unpaid rates, and then we're hitting the prompt payers for the tune of 4 million, which will be raised. You talk about this radical 10-year plan. If you're going by the first year, and you raise a cumulative level of 6 million a year, It's not really radical, is it?
So, just recapping on the points that I made earlier, Paul, we will bring forward the recommendations or the proposals for the Minister's consideration, and the determination will be made by the Executive. There's no policy decisions at this point, and the consultation will allow all of those views to be taken account of, the evidence to be set out, and a balanced decision made by the Executive. I'll emphasise the debt position again, because I deliberately brought the debt position and the collection of rates to the committee today to show our ambition in driving down on unpaid rates. So that is a priority for LPS moving forward. And whilst it could be better, there has been good progress made, and we are determined to double down on that.
On the 10-year plan, there's 7 reliefs that you could target. If you're doing 2 per year, that's 5 years. What happens to the other 10 years?
Where are you getting, what do you mean 7?
So all of the reliefs that you consulted on with regards to revenue raising?
Oh, that wasn't all the reliefs in the system. That wasn't all the reliefs in the system.
Wasn't all of them?
No, it was primarily led because it was requested by the Secretary of State, so it was what's called super parity measures by the Treasury.
Okay.
And that is measures that aren't in place in GB but that are in place here. The Secretary of State wanted to look at those measures in particular, to look at whether it was in the context of the financial situation that faced any incoming executive, and that's why those were selected in the first instance. No, there's many more within the system, and in terms of the 10-year cycle, I mean, one aspect of that is that there are smaller reliefs or less high-profile reliefs in comparison to the likes of industrial derating and things like that, which get quite an at times, that have sat within the system for years and do need to be looked at. So that's why that we want to make sure that every single one gets looked at and it is fit for purpose.
Are you talking about housing benefit?
Oh no, I mean housing benefit is a social security provision for starters. Rate rebate, which is the sort of replacement for a housing benefit for rates since universal credit rolled out, is a fairly new policy, and I think would have to come towards the back end of the 10-year cycle, because you see still rolling out as we speak.
You see any of these reliefs going up as opposed to coming down?
I mean, the Minister was quite clear that review doesn't mean removal, and in terms of going up, I think that's part of the element of the sectoral targeting that we talked about. You know, there is, if you were to target it more closely, make things less blunt in terms of the application, you would have the potential to target them, provided it's compliant with the subsidy rules.
Regarding 3.6 million, with regards to the housing benefit aspect that LPS still covers, if I'm right in saying that, it's very complicated, and we have it through our constituency offices with regards to confusion. But that 3.6 million is down. The audit office has it down as fraud and error. Can you break it down as to what's fraud and what's error? And if it's error, I take it's on the organisational part.
Yeah, so the administration of housing benefit for owner-occupiers transferred to the housing executive in 2021. So LPS and the department no longer administer that relief, but we are the statutory body responsible for the administration of it. So it sits within our accounts and it sits within our jurisdiction, but the administration of it is with the housing executive. The Northern Ireland Audit Office have broken it down, and I don't have the figures to hand.
Housing executive 12.7, LPS 3.6.
Yeah, so and they've further broken down the 3.6. They do break it down by official error, which is where people key in the wrong numbers, and they also then break it down by customer fraud, those claims which are made fraudulently, and those ones which are made in error, where the customer has genuinely applied but may not have been entitled to apply, but has made a genuine application.
Yeah, and we get that in our constituency offices all the time. But there's also the aspect of the two organisations not matching up with regards to data.
So the purpose of the transfer of function to the housing executive is to alleviate that issue, because in the past we did have that issue where the housing executive administered housing benefit for the tenant and rental sector, and LPS administered it for the owner occupiers. So we did have a crossover where some customers were going to the wrong place to make their application. Rate rebate is separate. LPS is responsible for the administration of rate rebate in its entirety, and I think that's where there is a difference of view in terms of where do you go for help for rates. But rate rebate is for working age claimants who are in receipt of universal credit. Housing benefit are for those people who are not entitled or eligible to apply for universal credit.
Thank you for that. With regards, and this is my last question, with regards to reval, and there's only been 3 revals in my lifetime if this goes ahead, how will that affect the 73,500 people who have yet to pay their rates? How do you see that demographic changing with a reval? So you would imagine that people who don't pay their rates, a lot of them can't pay, some of them won't pay. But how do you guys game that out as to how that will affect that property percentage, which is 8% who haven't paid all of their rates? How do you see a reval changing that percentage?
The reval won't change that percentage. What it will do is make sure that the rates liability is more equitable and fair as your starting point. It is then for collection, and you may be right, those people that aren't paying now may not pay in the future, but regardless of the rate or the rates bill that someone gets, we need to collect it. We need to double down on collection. So the reval in itself won't have an impact on whether people pay rates or not. There's a team of people within Chris's team in LPS who outreach to support people in terms of ensuring they understand the reliefs and the supports that they can avail of. And as I pointed out earlier, in terms of our debt collection and even in terms of our account maintenance, our approach more generally is to work with people on sustainable agreements to make sure that they pay something, that some collection continues rather than rates payments to fall into complete abeyance. So do slightly different things, Paul, from that regard.
I'm just interested in how it would game out, because obviously some people don't pay the rates because the bill is too much. If there was a reval that reduced that burden on them, they might be able to pay.
It's exactly the same on the non-domestic side. The reval, the non-domestic reval has that same impact. There are businesses that don't pay rates and are in that number that you quoted, despite the fact that maybe the reval hasn't increased their valuation and hasn't increased their rates in comparison to others, they still don't pay. We have that, and we have processes in place where we, as Sharon has said, where we reach out, we try and contact them, we try and make arrangements, we try and facilitate everything we can to get payment. Sometimes that means that the year-end figure, which was high at the end of March, that will be high because we're not collecting as much as what the assessments that have been raised would suggest we should. But that doesn't mean to say it's not being collected. It is being collected, but it's just been spread out over a bit longer.
Well, listen, thank you very much, Sharon, and I'm wishing you all the best for the future with regards to LPS. Thank you.
Okay, Terry Hargan.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, and congrats, Sharon, and good luck. Andrew, I would just be keen when you've done the work, because I think the engagement with councils is very important, particularly they are at the coalface often, and early warning system, I suppose, for yourselves. So I would be keen to get an update on that work that's being done, particularly above the shops, and as you say, how that can align to other support schemes, even that the councils are looking to do, because I know obviously they're in their rate setting process at the moment.
Yes, that's right.
And what additional spend over the next couple of years they can put into revenue and capital schemes. So I think it would be good just to get a sense in each of the council areas what type of worker programmes collectively, you're kind of working on in a bit more detail. I think that would be useful.
Sharon and myself and the Minister met on Monday with Chief Executive of Solace and the Vice Chair. And we want this process that was announced on Monday to work very much as a sort of rebooting of the relationship between councils in terms of getting them right at the heart of policy development as well.
Yeah.
So
I think that would be good then, just to get an update from the committee. And I suppose in terms of the other, it is about trying to get a fair system. I'm just waiting on Philip putting out his little red book here and Paul throwing it away again. But it's a new dynamic I haven't seen yet. But in terms of that, I mean, I think you're saying you're working over a 10-year cycle. Obviously, there needs to be the reval done again in terms of domestic properties, and I suppose on that, it's how you look, because there has been a lot of financial and societal shocks over that period of time. And obviously cost of living is a big issue when you look at the debt levels. And I'm just wondering, over the 10-year cycle, you're saying you can do, reviews even in between that period, where to try and, I suppose, mitigate against potential shocks that may come in the future. And it's just, what you can do in terms of looking at a lens of deprivation, dereliction, where there are those links that we know, are there. And are there interventions or new innovative approaches to the rating system that we could potentially adopt that maybe haven't been rolled out across these islands? Is there best practice elsewhere that we could be potentially looking at, and particularly where there may be, areas that there may be high rates or there may be inflated valuations in terms of property prices, but actually people couldn't afford it? And we don't want a scenario, because a lot of the councils, their LDPs, have plans for growth in terms of population moving into towns and city centres, but you don't want that pushing out a section of the population that can't afford it.
Yep.
And my concern is that we segregate on the basis of social class, that we've seen in the Tribeca scheme in the city centre in Belfast. So are there things that we can do through the rating system? Is there the potential, or working with other government departments that maybe have responsibilities to ensure that there aren't blips like that that's created, that will make parts of our society here more unaffordable for sections of our population? And I suppose then in terms of the non-domestic, then obviously, the link in with the economy department around the regional balance strategy, around even identifying the growth sectors for the future in terms of technology, automation, and that kind of future proofing, in that 10-year cycle. Are we doing constant reviews to kind of look ahead and have that bit of foresight that we can amend or change as we're going along as well? So just to get a sense of what cross-departmental work is going on, and also that work, I would be keen on the debt strategy when you're reviewing that as well, to try and understand where the debt is, what percentage is it that people are struggling financially, and then what are the supports that we can put in, or whether that's through the Department of Communities or elsewhere, in terms of trying to get people into maybe longer term repayment plans that is sustainable, rather than them falling off again at the first hurdle. So just keen to see, how flexible the system can be over the next period.
And maybe speak in general terms, and then Andrew could probably give a lot more detail in terms of the work that he's done in the past and will continue to do. Policy development is about that horizon scanning, understanding the priorities of government, working across government and all sectors, and listening to the voice of the public in terms of what needs to happen. Andrew, I know in the short time that I have been in LPS, has been very, very upfront in terms of his engagement approach, and his he's just referred to councils. We met with councils, as Andrew said, on Monday. We also met with the business and manufacturing community on Monday as well. So we are constantly in listening mode in order to bring forward the right interventions at the right time that will make a difference. Maybe Andrew, you want to add more detail?
Just to follow up on a couple of points the member raised in terms of the individual, looking at the policies and support measures individually, I think it'll give us much more scope for being able to drill down into that evidence base, the jurisdictional comparison across jurisdictions, but also tying it up with that sort of rich data that we can get from the NISRA side of things much more closely. It'll afford us the time to do that, because we're looking at each measure as it comes along. In relation to the sort of rating system and the societal sort of shifts that it could potentially cause, actually that came up in the context of the max cap consultation in the previous one that closed in February. in terms of this just removing it. In terms of the removal, there was an actual concern that was expressed by quite a lot of ratepayers about the fact that what would end up happening if you had a completely uncapped system was that there would be areas that only some people could afford to live in Northern Ireland. One of the consultees referred to it as golden ghettos, you know, where only people that could afford high rate bills would be able to live in them. So that informed our policy thinking, even in terms of the maximum cap approach. In terms of working across departmental with the other departments in terms of the business side of things, that's actually been quite prevalent over the last couple of weeks. Myself and Ian Snowden, its permanent secretary over in Economy, both met with the hospitality sector and their economists to look at the specific issues that were facing them. They have come off the back of and I mean, it's not just that sector by any means, but they've come off the back of COVID. They've come off the back of the cost of doing business crisis in terms of the inflation impact that hit their whole supply chain and all. And after COVID, they were also dealing with resourcing and staffing. But the latest thing in terms of the autumn budget, the cost of doing business has faced that sector in terms of the sort of regional strategy approach. Those parts of Northern Ireland that border on the Republic of Ireland, they had concerns that it could have a displacement effect on businesses as well. So it's that type of thing whereby Economy's technically in lead on the hospitality sector. It's the majority of the tourism offering here, but we want to sort of row in behind in terms of if there are rating measures and at what point rating measures should stop and other measures should kick in.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just address just in terms of the debt?
Yeah.
I have recently just met with my counterpart in the Department for Communities, and we have discussed about best practice and learning that LPS could possibly adopt with the approaches that the Department for Communities have with managing debt. So we're hopefully going to build on the relationship there going forward as well. So we do know, and as the other member Paul had mentioned about people who can't pay, we are willing to try and help those people as much as we can, but for us to understand what they can and can't pay, we don't do that. We don't carry out a means test on the rates system, but if we have a better understanding of what's affordable to them, we can get them better payment plans to deal with rate arrears and get them back on track with paying current year.
And your strategy in 2025, what quarter roughly do you think that will be ready for?
We will try and tie that in with our billing cycle. So our billing cycle will run from the beginning of April, fresh bills going out, and then we'll start then our engagement and our processes with dealing and contacting customers who haven't set up payment plans in around the summertime towards September, and then building that on forward. So our new plan, our new strategies are very much in an early stage where we're testing and doing things even currently now to see can this work. And we're taking those new approaches forward, but we'll develop the plan out and the strategy out in a bit more detail, hopefully at early stages of next year.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, members. No other members have indicated they wish to ask a question, just so we understand where things are. What is being consulted on is specifically the short-term measures. So the consultation is not on this broader strategic. So we had the consultation announced by the Secretary of State prior to restoration, and you have all those findings and you said they're useful. There's now a 10-week consultation on the short-term measures, so that will come back. That process will finish in what, March? Start of March, roughly, the beginning of March? Mid-March. There's then, at a certain point, there's then an undetermined period where the Minister will look at the responses. She will then decide whether to bring a paper to the Executive for agreement for 26-20 for those changes in 26-27. Okay, I would simply say, on mature reflection, it's rather a long time for us to get to a point. 3 executive meetings where it wasn't put on the table, trailed in the media, a 10-week consultation, an undetermined period for the Minister to consider whether to bring it back to the Executive for the purposes of raising £6 million in the context of £120 million of uncollected rates and an overall take of £2 billion. But I think there are very talented officials here in front of me, and I'm not directing criticism at you particularly, but I am saying I think it's important to put this in context. Some of the reporting has been that you would think that we were radically reviewing how we do rates, and that we were raising loads of revenue in Northern Ireland because the Treasury made us do it, or whoever made us do it. We're taking a very long time over whether to raise what is in effect a rounding error, and that's not to diminish the importance of these measures. But in any case, I think I've made that point. But thank you very much. That was really useful. Thank you, Sharon. I hope you'll come back on many occasions. That was a very useful briefing session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
In the 10-year cycle, of course, now that we have 10 years, we'll have lots of...
We're friends now. We're not letting you wait for 10 years.
I hope
Retirement might get in the way.
If it's a 10-year cycle, I hope it's an electric bike, because it'll be going for a long time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, members. We're now
Back to number 6.
going back to...
Chair, can I just ask a question?
Yes, please do.
Just for a follow-up, just to clear. So,
Can I clarify your position?
yeah, no, my position will change. Me and Jerry Carroll are on the same side. Just
The red tag.
I did. So, point 17 on that paper that was produced by the officials. So, prior year unpaid rates. So that's 180 million. Okay. So progress within the first 6 months of this rating year. So that's April to December.
Yeah.
Has reduced that overall figure by 34.1 million according to this document. Okay. So 180 million take away 34 million. I'm not a maths expert, but is not the 119 figure that they're referencing. So could we just try to find out?
Yeah, given that we're doing a hell of a lot of work to raise 6 million quid, I think it's not unreasonable for us to do the maths on this one. That's fine. I would also just ask for, it would be helpful, I think, either via LPS or I know the LPS is part of the department, but to understand precisely what we mean by the cycle. Cycle can mean lots of different things. The Ulster cycle in Irish mythology. We have the ring cycle is Wagner. I don't entirely know what whether this is a cycle that will end or what the.
Would these changes, Chair, require legislation, or would?
So, do you mean the short-term changes? I think one of them might. I would say the early discount one certainly would require legislation, and I would imagine I'd imagine they both would require certainly secondary legislation.
Chair, I think members will recall quite a while back when we had officials up specifically on the Secretary of State directed consultation did talk about anything that would have to be done would have to be consulted on specifically, and there would be a requirement for legislative change. So I think that probably captures almost all of the changes that have been talked about. But we'll seek specifics on that, Chair. Thank you.
Great, I think if we can answer those questions in correspondence.
Which then adds to your time lag, if it's secondary legislation or even primary legislation.
Indeed. Okay. Members can help with that. We will crack on. Now we're going to go back to agenda item 6, the designation of bodies. In very fast moving real time, we've received clarification from the department while we've been sitting here on some of the questions we asked in relation to the government resources and accounts. We had proposed to bring back this in the new year, but we have been informed both some clarification in relation to the question we asked, but also that there is, in the department's view, a significant time sensitivity around the laying of the spring supplementary estimates. And I think given that they told us that promptly,
Are you being serious about that?
well, I don't have any particular I don't have any particular reason to think that there's a to not believe them on this, but I'll let the clerk explain.
What it is if this isn't dealt with today, the impact then on the 21-day rule in laying the spring supplementary estimates comes into play. The clarification that has been sent to us around rationale of particular bodies. So the procurement board is being removed because it can't receive anything other than from the Northern Ireland Consolidated Fund, therefore doesn't need to be on the list anymore. That's why DOF want to take it off. In terms of the other 5 bodies, that's been done in consultation with the relevant sponsoring department. The rationale for the I'm trying to find the right word, very specific changes is because the schedule must have those appearing with an acronym, the right acronym, within the relevant department's supply and resource accounts. and that's the rationale for doing this. It's a designation of bodies that is only a list that's necessary because there is the potential for them to receive funds that are not necessarily coming from the Northern Ireland Consolidated Fund, hence why the procurement board has disappeared off the list, because it can't. And any other bodies that wouldn't be on the list are because there is no potential for them to be able to receive anything from other than the Northern Ireland Consolidated Fund. Chair, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you. And just to reiterate the point made by my colleague Paul Frey, if this was so time sensitive, is disappointed that it didn't come previously with full information to support it as it comes here, because as it lands in front of us here, we're taking a decision, and I fully appreciate that this is the annual government accounts listing of bodies. I used to use it to audit those bodies. I know the reason for it, but it's whenever it's coming forward through the Department of Finance Committee, saying that it's changing things in other departments. I would have preferred to have seen some sort of support from the TEO to say this is why they're changing and we're satisfied, and the Department for Economy to say that as well. So
I think it's very important to put that point on the record in general. I think it's where even when things are routine, we are going to be more likely to take their word for it and to understand them being routine if we're given the information promptly and with more realistic time horizons. I'm but I'll let others speak.
A question I would have is, not to prolong the issue, but the question I have is, what did they do last year?
Well, I'm trying to remember if we would have had it last year.
it was one of the ones whenever the committee was restored, was put through as the retrospective in the first session, the marathon session that.
That was that was a long cycle.
Well, I'm sure if we need further clarification, I'm sure we'll be here for at least another half an hour yet. But I would be loath to allow the department to blame Diane for holding up the budget.
Yeah. Well, they've probably made more implausible claims than that in their day.
Is that your Christmas present to the department? Is it?
My view is.
Bring it, but we put on record the issue.
I think we should put on record those issues, but it is if people are content to proceed with it on the basis that, number two, we ask for them to, even if it's post hoc, to provide us in writing with the clarifications we have asked for, and to communicate to them that we shouldn't be put in a position where we have to decide, even if it's routine, it's still our job to assure ourselves that we have all the information, so it shouldn't happen with this in the distant future.
Yeah, I suppose the question is, when did they have this list?
Okay.
Just
Steve Aiken.
Sure. Sorry, this is a serious point here. My concern is that by not getting the nomenclature right and then bringing it to us at this late stage, there's either an indication that something's fallen over in the process. And I would just probably like to have a bit of an explanation from whoever is the responsible or accounting person for this particular piece of why that's occurred. Because I think, bearing in mind what the Audit Office has recently said about some of the number of accounts that have been qualified, it just fills me with a bit of concern that this is normal base procedure and it's been dropped on us at the last minute. It looks as if somebody's either missed something or the processes aren't being followed. I just think this might be something we just need to keep a careful eye on.
So when you say to keep a careful eye, are you suggesting that we shouldn't indicate that we are content with the receipt, or are you suggesting we should ask for more information?
Look, I think, and I agree very clearly with the Deputy Chair. Look, this has been dropped on us. Somebody somewhere is messed up on this one. It's come through, but it does raise those higher concerns that who is actually responsible, who's accounting for this, and we need to have a fuller explanation of why this has occurred.
Okay.
Chair, can I make the suggestion that we will have the officials up to talk us through the SR, which would then allow the committee to have all of those questions answered in an interactive way. So the SL1, and agreeing the SL1, it's the policy issue. The SR will give, obviously, that's the statutory will be laid itself, and the officials can then answer any sort of further issues that the members want to raise.
One day rule, when's that drop it into?
So,
yeah, I don't understand why. This week,
because the scheduling so far on the spring supplementary estimates is for the 10th of February. So that's part of why this needs to be done now, is that these have got to be right because they're part of the supply estimates for each of those departments. So it's to get all the legal pieces in
You're
place.
saying that they will bring the SR to us in our very first meeting back on the 15th? Yeah?
Hopefully saying that.
Okay.
The timings just seems so. Sorry, I'm not belabouring this. I'm not trying to. It just seems the timing seem. Yeah.
Does seem
I'm
a
still mentally processing this, Chair.
That's what I'm not getting it.
Well, can I suggest this? That what we do is that we indicate that we are content with the principle, subject to the concerns that we have raised around process, and that we go back to the department on that basis, that we have discussed it. But we are going to get a briefing on the SR, even though we've already indicated that we are broadly content with the SR, which seems a bit of an unusual way around to be doing it. And that we ask them, and that we suggest that we shouldn't be doing this in future, if we're happy.
Chair, I've just mentally completed my calculation.
Resolution.
Negative.
It's negative, so it can be prayed against. The 21-day rule is based on it being laid on the 6th of January.
Okay.
So counting back
That makes sense.
was
So
why
that's
it
why it
had to
has to be
come
done.
today.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Took me a while to count that one back.
Okay.
My backward counting's slow.
Okay, so people content. I think it's really important, and I think it is worth people unpacking it, because this is like we should all be aware of what we're doing and our legislative responsibilities. And even where it seems routine, and it is routine, we should all be aware that we are passing effectively laws, even in very minor ways, in these committees. Okay, right. We're going to go back to matters arising and get through hopefully as much of it as possible. We're going back to page 12. Yeah. Sorry, just page 12 is mine. Sorry, that's in my note rather than everybody else's. Yes. That's my little private Bible here. Okay. Members, page 56 of the meeting pack, we've been provided with the ERA Minister's written statement, which sets out the Minister's plan for communications in relation to the Farm Support and Development Programme. This has been included as it is budget related. The Minister has reflected on the removal of the earmark status and lack of multi-year funding from HM Treasury and indicated that the process to agree the draft budget for 25-26 has not yet been completed. In the meantime, the Minister is putting an interim plan in place in order to provide clarity and stability for farm businesses. A fuller programme of plans will be confirmed when there is confirmation of a draft budget. Okay, that's to note at this point. People are content to note. Sorry, yes.
Just a quick one. Obviously, with the funding for DERA, there was in September. There had to be an approval to bring forward from the contingent fund, because obviously the budget hadn't been approved and all the processes hadn't been gone again. We're now into another example where the budget hasn't come forward, and we're probably hitting some more of those coming into other payments coming up towards the end of the financial year as well. Would it be worth just getting an overview of what else is outstanding? Because we wouldn't have this problem if we'd have the draft budget in front of us, but we don't have a draft budget. I don't know where it is, but
we're going to come on and talk about the draft budget, I think, in a bit. So can I just say we park that until we come in to talk about the draft budget, because it's relatively kind of. We will bring it back and talk about a broader question about the 25-26 budget. Okay, so that's dealt with. The next two agenda items are letters from the Department of Finance to other departments on 24-25 SSEs, which we've just been discussing, and January monitoring. On the 26th of November, the Public Spending Director of the Department commissioned information from all departments in relation to January monitoring. They were also asked to provide information on budget cover transfers, information on transactions not requiring executive approval by the 6th of December, information on transactions which did require executive approval by 3rd of January 25-26, and evidence-based explanation for any amount shown in non-budget expenditure position by 6th of December. On the 27th of November, the Public Spending Director of the Department commissioned information from all departments in relation to the 24-25 SSEs, including guidance and templates, budget bill and estimates memorandum. Returns are due by the 13th of December and 16th of January. So that is to note these commissioning documents. Obviously, we will find out where things are in terms of departmental plans and pressures, if members are content to know. But the Deputy Chair wishes to go in.
Yeah, no, just on that, on the deadlines, and you know, I just think with one past, one this week, it just would be important that we stay abreast of who has got what in on time in terms of the departments, and ask that other committees, or bring to the attention of other committees what these dates are, so that they can be actually asking it into their departments as well.
Yes, I could completely agree, and I think that was helpfully on my note, and you've anticipated the bit I haven't read out yet, Diane, so fair play, which is we should first of all agree, if people are content, to circulate this to other committees, but if people are also content, we could ask the department for a list, a little bit like perhaps a list of who's been naughty and who's been nice.
We've had it
and we hopefully they will check it twice to see who's returned with their template documents. I know something Mr. Frew is very keen on, so we will, like Santa's little helpers, we'll do that. Okay, 5.11. Next agenda item is correspondence regarding members of the Fiscal Council. The department has written to inform the committee of members of an update on the Fiscal Council membership. Professor Alan Barrett, who's Chief Executive of Esri in Dublin, has been reappointed for a term till March 2026 indicated. So this will allow for the passage of the Fiscal Council bill in the Assembly, and a consideration of how a formal public appointments process is then undertaken in line with CPANI guidelines. Now, the only question I had to this is, was he off the Fiscal Council?
So he was on, and then he left.
Yeah.
And was requested, but because of the time scale before the bill, would he come back again, and he agreed to do that.
So I think that's just I have a lot of time for Alan Barrett. He's a very effective member of the Fiscal Council, but that slight anomaly, thankfully he's come back on, but it sounds like he's come back on in order to enable the Fiscal Council bill to proceed. That sort of underlines the urgency of the Fiscal Council bill proceeding, because it highlights that it highlights what the challenges of not having a statutory basis, so you're not necessarily running with public appointments processes, and you end up with situations where people who might have other pressures, so I think that underlines the need to get that, and obviously, and I think if the Dáil is here, hopefully we'll get an update at some point soon on the actual Fiscal Council bill that I think we're expecting in the first quarter of 2025. Okay, people are content. The next agenda item is on the Motor Insurance Task Force from the Committee of Infrastructure. They've written to the Finance Minister seeking update from her on discussions between the Cross-Government Motor Insurance Task Force. The committee is copied into the correspondence and expect to be copied in to the response. I would be interested to see that, because I'm not entirely clear it's a little bit like the Banking Task Force, what exactly the planned outcome or output is. Okay.
I just want to ask, Chair, in terms of our inquiry, where we're referring, banking services and insurance, is this an element that we can link into in terms of our inquiry? It's just quite current.
Well, definitely, it definitely is a financial service. Now, there's the insurance industry has its own trade body, and they are regulated in a slightly different way. They're not regulated as a bank. Obviously, it's a financial service, but it's a different form of service. So, can I suggest we ask the clerk to go away and look at that, and whether there's any evidence we could take? But I'm not sure. I would
be keen to just flag the fact that it is a finance issue. We're already looking at insurance. Even though it's not developed, and rather than it just sit with the infrastructure, I just feel like
definitely. I think there is some work we can do. It may be that we. I'm not sure. I think it might be a challenge for us to get all the full richness of information at this point, but certainly we can, I think, touch on it. We can have that in evidence.
I think, and I need to check, Chair, but I think Economy have had briefing. Economy Committee has had briefing, but I'll check back with them whether they're taking up a strand on this. And I know they had correspondence with other committees on this as well. So I'll check back, Chair, and I'll come back to the committee with what we can pin down is going on elsewhere, and then look at potentially weaving that in as part of the inquiry.
Okay, great. The next agenda item is quarterly sickness absence 5.13. Quarterly sickness absence in NICS. That's on page 91 of the meeting pack. NISRA has published their latest quarterly data on sickness absence in NICS. The proportion of staff with no recorded spells of sickness absence has increased. That's a good thing. So the number of people who haven't been off sick has increased. The working days lost per staff has decreased. Again, a good thing. The percentage of available working days lost has dropped. And there's various other bits there. So there's some better news in there. So there is another item in the table pack which we're going to discuss, which they can which is alongside in the table pack. What is that other item in the table pack? I should have a look.
And there's in the items in the table pack, it does outline how they're compiling an awful lot of information based on our queries from the time that they were here. So I think that it's probably just best if we wait until that comes through before fully considering it. There was at least half a dozen quite substantive items that they were working on that were directly from our inquiry.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Steve Aiken, do you want to make
a very quick one? It's good to see that data is beginning to come through, but I notice sort of with about 10% of the workforce being often related to some kind of illnesses or work-related process and the rest of it, might be useful to have a comparison of that with other sort of public service bodies and regions as well, because it does. I mean, that sort of strikes out.
We already, in fact, I think we do already have the other regions, don't we?
So
have all
on the high level figures in terms of, Chair, the new things we're looking at, the extrapolations we've asked for. I'll ask the department, but I suspect what we're asking for may not be readily available in the format that it's being prepared for us from other jurisdictions. But we'll ask what's available, because I think it's just the sort of things we've asked for comparisons of aren't necessarily being done with normal data sets. So we just need to check what's actually out there. So we'll bring that back as well. As the Deputy Chair says, we have a number then of outstanding new data sets without putting those together specifically for the committee's requests.
Okay, so great. Excellent, we will get that information back. So page 26 of the table pack, which is what we just discussed actually, there we have all some of the various bits that we requested information from the department on. So that's to note the response, and as we said, we're expecting more, so we may want to revisit it when we have the complete response, the complete picture, if people are content. Okay, so the next agenda item is from Ulster University Strategic Policy Unit, response to the draft PFG. The committee has been forwarded a series of papers produced by the Strategic Policy Unit of Ulster University, setting out a range of policy observations across various areas. Samples of academic research have also been provided which may be relevant to the committee's work on banking and financial services. That is to note, and we will, I guess, consider whether any of that's relevant to our future work. Okay, unless anybody wishes to comment on it, the next agenda item is in the tabled pack, and that is the urgent ministerial statement on rating and strategic roadmap. I think we've discussed that at some length, including the evidence session. Unless anybody wishes to say anything more about it, the next agenda item is progression of forthcoming legislation, which we have also talked about. That's at page 21 of the meeting pack. The Minister has given us an update on both the the registration of death, stillbirths and baby loss bill, the Marriage Civil Partnership bill, and the financial provision bill. So in relation to the registration of death, stillbirths and baby loss bill, the Minister indicates that a further matter has been added to the scope of the bill, which has again delayed its finalisation. Officials have identified a number of inconsistencies in registration processes for same-sex female couples who are not married or in a civil partnership on the one hand, and heterosexual couples who are not married or in a civil partnership on the other. Full details are outlined in the Minister's correspondence. However, officials have been directed to include legislative provision in this bill to remedy these differences to ensure equality in the registration processes for these different groups. The Minister expects to bring the bill to the Executive and then to the Committee and Assembly in New Year. Excuse me. This may lead to a short extension to the provisions of the Coronavirus Act 2020 at the end of March to enable the bill to complete its parliamentary passage. Where have we heard this before? In relation to the Marriage and Civil Partnership Bill, drafting is underway. It is scheduled as a Year 2 session bill, 25-26, but the Minister is hopeful the bill will be introduced in Year 1 and before the summer recess. The Minister also indicates that a financial provisions bill is being drafted by OLC and anticipates it will be ready by early 2025. To go back to my earlier point, there was nothing in there about the Fiscal Council bill.
We previously had an update on that, which gave us the first quarter thing, so we didn't ask again.
Okay. Deputy Chair, I would just say one thing, which is that there's the Justice Bill, which is currently being considered. There's a bit of controversy and commentary about the Minister introducing the bill and then having a suite of amendments to bring forward. Without commenting on the merits otherwise of that approach, it would seem like if some of the anomalies around registration processes are significant enough that the department would want to remedy them in legislation, it would seem like that is the kind of thing that you could probably bring forward in amendment while the bill was going through, rather than being this. Do you know what I mean? So I'm kind of intrigued as to why they haven't just.
Chair, the committee has asked, members will recall the conversation about potentially how that could be done around baby loss certificates. The department has indicated it wishes to bring this forward as part of a drafted bill, rather than try and bring anything through in the amendment in that process.
Sure. Deputy Chair, apologies.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the point that you had made earlier on the basis of the other schedule. This is all very general. There's no specific dates, early in the new year, first quarter and things like that. And I just would, you had made the point with, the previous schedule of it. I would be keen to go back and ask for a bit more specific dates so we can plan our work schedule to make sure we can align scrutiny, because whenever we're talking in these very general terms, it's it's hard to hold them to account.
Having pressed the First Minister on the question of what it was called in a written statement, the 2024, when we were told it was called the 24 legislation programme, and then magically had transformed into the 24-25 legislation programme, according to the First Minister the other day. I would be keen to have specifics on that too. I don't think just in the new year is good enough, given we already have, like in this 10-month period, we've already had quite a bit of mañana on bills. People are content that we go back and answer that. Paul Frew, yeah.
So this is starting to turn into a wee bit of a bunkers game here, and I do think it's bordering on contempt. We were told on 27th of November that we would have this bill in front of us in January. When I pressed them on it, it is the first week in January, which is the 15th. That's a month away. It's a whole month away. Now, how do we get to a point where they have now all of a sudden discovered that there is another matter that they want to add to this bill? It just doesn't make sense to me that they wouldn't have discovered this sooner. And it smacks to me that there's something going badly wrong. And the point I will make is this: they are proposing to bring forward a marriage and civil partnership bill in year 2.
Yeah.
So why would this other matter not probably sit better, or at least sit alongside that bill? Which means then it wouldn't delay this bill, the stillbirth bill, death and stillbirth bill, which then we could scrutinise, get it through the books, get it into for royal assent, and then we'll be able to work on the marriage and civil partnership bill the next year.
Okay, well, I think it's really important for us just to go back and say we're concerned about the drift in all of this. We would like more specific dates or months, so when we're going to be able to see these this draft legislation. Members are content. We'll go with that, because I agree it is becoming frustrating.
They shouldn't test political parties on this issue just because the measures that we have continually adopted over 6 months. They shouldn't test people on this. Thank you.
A quick one, Chair. We've already had this incident where we had with a SL coming through, which was getting the nomenclature right, and they're coming in at short notice. And here, is there some issue with the drafting of the bills?
I think so.
Sorry, do you mean with capacity in terms of drafting the bill?
Yeah, it just seems that we've had one here that we have to get this done because it needs to be done, and then we're having this last minute changes. They've already given evidence to us to bring. It just seems. Don't believe in coincidence. So
they can tell us in their response with more precision.
Yeah,
dude.
I think it doesn't hurt getting more information on it. I mean, it might not be this big grand conspiracy. I know just from the Justice Bill that's gone through, the biometric element, there was amendments made and now there's subsequent amendments, and that's because when the department went out to the likes of the PSNI, and I don't know if there's similar in terms of other stakeholders that are engaged when they look in terms of the practicalities of implementing, then there were further changes that need to be made. So I just know that's an example in that bill. So I think just getting the clarity in terms of the addendums. I mean, I'm looking at the first one, and obviously the addendums are to sit with the registration of stillbirths in terms of heterosexual couples and unmarried fathers and stuff. So maybe it does fit better in this bill rather than the other, but I suppose just to get the clarity.
So even if it does fit better in the deaths and stillbirths bill, it's still not a stretch to say they could wait and do it in the bill in the next one, because that's civil partnerships. So it is relatable. The Justice Bill is a basket case, because there was 6 areas of department responsibility that they left out intentionally at the start. But then they've also, everything they had in the bill at second reading, they've actually amended all of that too. So I worry about this place. I really do.
Okay. Let's get the urgent clarity that we've talked about. I mean, I think it's just worth saying that whether it's cock-up or conspiracy, it's definitely one of, I doubt it's conspiracy, but it definitely is it's a cock-up to the extent that we are waiting for legislation in general.
For avoidance of doubt, I'm not saying it's a conspiracy.
Okay, that's fine. I think those points have been...
I led quite closely to your first comments, Chair, about what it possibly is.
Look at the journey we've been on. This was secondary legislation at the start. Yeah. Then it went primary. Yeah. Then it went primary again. Then we had to add something else on. Then we're going to add something else on.
I think it is important that we get the clarity for that reason. Okay, so we will get that clarity. Okay, order. The next agenda item is from the Justice Committee. It relates to the bereavement service in Northern Ireland. The Justice Committee previously wrote to the Department to state that it would support a similar service to the Tell Us Once service in Great Britain being available here. The Department has responded to the Committee saying that the structure of how public services are delivered makes implementing such a service quite challenging. To extend the bereavement service provided by DFC to mirror the Tell Us Once service is likely to be complex, involving legislative change to facilitate data sharing. It can be established between separate standalone systems used across the public sector. This would require executive approval, be subject to establishing affordability and securing the necessary funding. However, DFC is committed to further preliminary investigation to better understand the size, scale and scope of this work. This is to note this response. I would just say Tell Us Once is a really good thing, and unfortunately it's really makes your heart sink whenever you read a small jurisdiction like this say this is too hard because we've got all these different departments that don't talk to one another. If we can't get this kind of stuff right, if we can't achieve this in a small jurisdiction, it really breaks your heart. I know a lot of it's to do with the constitutional separation between the different departments and the side of the way we work, but surely this is the kind of thing, as I'm sort of speaking in personal capacity, it really is the kind of thing you should be able to do. If they can do it on a much bigger scale, why can't we do it here? But that's just my view, to be honest. Right. I don't know why we should. Anyway, so the next agenda item is 5.19. That's the Justice Committee's 24-25 October monitoring round outcome. The Justice Committee sent this committee a copy of its briefing on the outcome of the 24-25 monitoring round. And that's just to note that response on this is at page 65 of the table pack. Sorry, the Deputy Chair.
I just want to say, just for the record, it's good to see these informations coming through from the Justice Committee. The Vice Chair being on the Finance Committee obviously has a good impact on it, and seeing some correspondence coming through from the Economy Committee as well. So it's just good to see. It's good to see it coming through.
Excellent. Well, they're on the nice list for them. So, and further to the Justice Committee is their budget and the 25-26 and equality impacts. They forwarded this committee a response from DOJ to the Department of Finance, which provided further information on the potential equality impacts of the budget 25-26. This was provided in response to the DOF commissioning note issued on the 15th of November. So members, this is to note this response and to agree to write to other statutory committees to ascertain whether they have received information on potential equality impacts of the draft budget for 25-26 and to ask the Department for clear response if people are content. Next agenda item is the Economy Committee's, from the Economy Committee it relates to the Chancellor's budget statement. The Economy Committee has written to the Department of Finance to seek further information and clarity in respect of prompt payment by departments, capital decision making, VAT research and hotel/pub COVID rates relief. I presume that means, I'm not sure what that means. Does that mean analysis?
Measures that were in place before?
Yes.
Potentially continuing those.
Okay, oh yeah. Okay. We've been copied into the correspondence, going to expect to see the response in due course. Okay, and this obviously follows our meeting on Monday. As members are content, we will get the response in due course. The next agenda item relates to DFE staff vacancies. That is at page 121 of the table pack. The Economy Committee shared correspondence from the Department of the Economy regarding the impact of the growing level of staff vacancies on departmental service delivery and the Department's plans to address vacancy levels. They have provided detail on how it's managing its vacancy level within the department, highlighting specific resourcing concerns in a number of business areas, as well as challenges for the department in its effort to fill vacancies. It's one thing that's interesting, I think something for us to pursue, is that they talk about the lack of supply, basically, at general service and professional grades across the Northern Ireland Civil Service. I think that's something for us to investigate further in our work on the civil service, including what the constraints are, why it's, what the competitiveness. For example, just off the top, is it that there are more generalist professional services jobs in the likes of the big corporations here in Belfast that weren't there maybe 15, 20 years ago, and so at professional grades there's a bit more competition, and that, and that would so that might indicate that some of those that it's harder for next to recruit, but I'd be interested in that. So that's to note the correspondence, and remind members that there's further information to come on this from DOF. So I don't know if it might be worth someone giving me or us collectively a prompt to remember this information whenever we get the information back on the broader civil service.
All together, Chairman, the additional information comes in, we bring all that back with the various issues and suggestions that they're about.
Great, excellent, thank you. The next agenda item is relates to the Audit Committee and their draft budgets for 25-26. Draft budgets for the Audit Office, the Northern Ireland Public Services Ombudsman, IPSO, and the Northern Ireland Assembly Commission, NIAC. Page 1232, apologies, of the table pack, you'll find a copy of correspondence to the Finance Minister from the Audit Committee regarding budgets for these organisations. The correspondence was sent in November, but we only got it last week, or sorry, the beginning of this week, due to administrative oversight. And indeed, the Assembly debated NIAC's budget already this week. So that has kind of already happened. But just members, obviously, the consideration of the NI Assembly budget is a matter for the Audit Committee, and so otherwise this is to note. Unless anybody has any comments to make. Okay. Now the next agenda item.
So, Chair.
Yes.
Just logistically, because that's. Also, I see a hand up from Mr.
Sorry, Jerry. Did you want to come in on the? What did you want to come
next item, Chair, please?
So.
Okay.
The next item, Chair, we have to go into a closed session.
Okay.
We might just leave that to the end of the meeting, do correspondence first, because it's logistically it's easier.
Okay.
If members are content to do that order.
That's just fine. through you, Chair. I mean, I was going to raise an issue just to say, I know there's aspect that is confidential, but there's aspects that aren't, and I want to discuss those aspects in public session. If that.
Okay. So let me. So in terms of what is and isn't in closed session, let me first of all. I'll tell you what we'll do is we will go through correspondence quickly, and then we'll go back to this as substantive agenda item, and we will discuss it in closed session, and then we'll go back and air any issues in open session. So any points members want to raise can be put on the record. Is that okay?
Yeah. Content? Yep.
Yeah. Okay. How about that, Chair?
You will. Like, don't worry. I will give you the opportunity to put stuff on the record. Don't worry, Jerry.
Okay.
Yep. So we're moving now to correspondence, and we will just. Yes. Okay. So we have before that we have to we'll just cover a memorandum of reply from the department to the PAC report on broadband investment. Members, on the 5th of June we considered the department's memorandum of reply to the PAC report on broadband investment. There are 10 recommendations in that report, 5 relevant to the Department of Economy and 5 fell to the Department of Finance. We had several months ago agreed to seek an update from the department in 6 months' time, which is about now, to ensure that all recommendations relevant have been implemented. The department indicate that all 5 recommendations have now been implemented. So this is, members, if you're content, we will update the PAC in relation to our scrutiny job, and we'll let the PAC know what we have, what we've done, and what we found out. Is that okay? Okay. Next, now we'll formally go into correspondence. We'll try and get through it as quickly as possible. It may be that I do fire through quite some of these very quickly. Some of them are relatively routine, and some of them even make you question why they bothered to send it to us in the first place, to be honest. God love them, that's fine. We don't mind receiving correspondence, but sometimes you do wonder why they bother. Anyway, the first agenda item is the Department of Finance and the UK Swiss. I'm not talking about the correspondence today, let me be clear. The odd one that we get. Anyway, the UK Swiss agreement on legal professional regulation. Members will find correspondence from the department regarding legislative amendments to give effect to a UK Swiss agreement on the recognition of professional qualifications. DOF has responsibility for the regulation of the legal profession. However, this is undertaken on a practical level by the Law Society and the Bar Council. the Minister of Finance would need to bring forward legislation to ensure the agreement works effectively for the legal profession, the NI. So members, this is to note this correspondence pending further consideration the 15th of January. I think this is quite an interesting subject. It's although it does relate to the UK, Switzerland rather than, and it does again reinforce the slightly odd anomaly that the Department of Finance covers matters lots of matters in relation to the legal industry. I think lots of people would be slightly baffled as to why this is not being done by the Justice Department. But anyway, who am I to question? 10.2, Committee for Infrastructure, correspondence to the Minister of Finance regarding NI Water industrial action. So the Committee for Infrastructure has written to the Finance Minister regarding reports that some employees of NI Water are going to begin industrial action. The committee asked the Minister about action to resolve the situation, including approval of the business case for pay outcomes. My members will be aware that industrial action has been suspended pending the outcome of the ballot. That's to note at this point, unless anybody wishes to raise anything. 10.3 is Committee for Communities correspondence to the Department of Finance regarding the anti-poverty strategy. Following a briefing from the Department of Communities officials on ongoing work on the draft anti-poverty strategy, the Communities Committee has agreed to write to all departments to ask that any work attributed to the Department of the anti-poverty strategy be expedited to ensure there are no delays in the publication of the strategy. The committee was copied into this correspondence. It's to note, okay? The next agenda items are Hansard transcripts from our briefings on the 27th of November from the Minister of Finance and the Departmental Solicitor's Office. That's to note, unless anybody wishes to raise anything. The next agenda item is all from the Examiner Statutory Rules, and she's published her 20th report. There are no rules referenced with relevance to this committee, therefore the report is provided for noting purposes only. Agenda item 10.7 is the Peace Plus Changemaker Small Grants Programme. The committee has been sent notification of the upcoming Peace Plus small grant schemes aimed at grassroots committees. The Changemaker funds open for applications in January 25 will distribute £40 million. Cooperation Ireland, in partnership with Rural Action and East Border Region, have been contracted to promote the event, promote the programme and support groups ready to apply. A list of events has been provided, and obviously I would encourage members in their capacity as MLAs and through their parties to flag this to relevant potential bidders. So that's just to note. 10.8, revisions to labour market stats for Northern Ireland. At page 157 of the table pack, the committee has received correspondence from the Department of Finance regarding revisions to labour market statistics, which were published on the 3rd of December. Details have been provided in respect of the sources of the revisions, which arose from two specific changes: an ONS re-weighting exercise, and as a result of this exercise, an error in the processing of the NI labour market results. So that is that is detailed in the pack if people wish to scrutinise it. Members content to note that correspondence? Okay, Grant. Then we will go back to the previous agenda item and we will go into closed session, hopefully briefly, and after that we will go back into open session so that members can raise the points. And the points, and I would just say before we go into closed session, we do it as a courtesy to departments when they ask for it, even if on occasion it's a bit absurd, as we found earlier this year whenever LPS / the department asked us to discuss a very vague generic ratings consultation in closed session. But we will go into closed session. I think we...
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound.
So,
Pressed. And I'm not sure the cameras don't light up like they used to.
They don't line up here.
okay. Well, I assume we will go back in now to open, and we are now back in open session. We've had an opportunity to look at the slightly questionable reasons that we were given for discussing it in restricted session. We have been given, for the purposes of putting it on the record, we've been given a table of the value of current Fujitsu contracts and frameworks with Northern Ireland public bodies, authorities, to quite a significant value, including ones that are worth hundreds upon hundreds of millions of pounds. And obviously, we're keeping across this because of the post-Horizon context and the public interest in this particular provider. I'll bring in members and give them the opportunity to have their speak, reflecting the fact that we have agreed that one particular item is to remain restricted, even if we have some questions about why it's restricted. The members will just respect that one particular narrow element of restriction, but we are asking the department why that has to be restricted, but give people the opportunity to have their say on what they've seen. Jerry Carroll.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, obviously, I've raised this issue a few times in the committee, and it is in light of the Horizon scandal. I mean, I think my calculation is it's over £1.2 billion of public money going to Fujitsu, which is quite stark in any sense, but given what they've been accused of. The Welsh Government, there's been calls for them to suspend all contracts with Fujitsu. EA have obviously pulled back on aspects, I think, if not all of its contract with Fujitsu. And I'll just remind the committee, the Fujitsu boss in Europe, Paul Patterson, stated he doesn't know if the IT Horizon system is reliable. So one of the head people in Fujitsu has told Westminster committee, that he doesn't know if it's reliable. So there's massive alarm bells around this organisation, and at the very least it requires further scrutiny. Not only the question of public money and is it right for so much public money to go to a private organisation, but of this nature, given what they've been accused of. There's a whole question about data protection, whether it is a safe or reliable organisation, and these have to be posed at the very least. So I want to propose that we contact the Finance Minister and ask that her department reviews all payments to Fujitsu. Ideally, they probably should suspend all, not most of them, but at the very least, I want to propose that we ask her department to review the payments to Fujitsu and ask whether she and her department thinks it's a safe and reliable organisation to receive so much public money. So that's my proposal, Chair. Thanks for letting me raise it.
Okay, Diane Forsyth.
Thank you. In terms of a specific contract, I just wanted to speak to the Health and Social Care Framework Agreement, £600 million over the next 4 years. It's been identified as a huge amount of money, but it has been identified that it is a framework and no money's been drawn down upon it yet, and given that it was quite recently awarded, I would ask that we consider should that be reviewed in light of recent events in terms of the procurement side and how the Department of Health feels about that before any further engagement is taken forward on that contract.
Okay, Steve Aiken.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Chair. And I'm very conscious of sort of the restrictions we've been put in actually discussing this, but as Jerry's quite clearly said, it's about 1.2 billion potential in public monies going to Fujitsu. One of the questions that we've had is we've had some significant problems with IT systems that have been reported to us in this committee over the number of years, and we haven't seen any penalties or indeed whether there's been any reviews of the contracts that have come through. I think the question I would ask, and maybe in continuation of what Jerry said, I can't believe I'm actually agreeing with Jerry, but I am today, that we might actually ask has there been any independent review on this that has been done? The only reason I'm saying this is that, you know, the volume of these contracts is, you know, significant, 1.2 billion, and some of the concerns of delivery that we've had so far, and, you know, a lot of these contracts have just been rolled over, and I think that's just the point I would like to make. I don't have any more information ready to sort of make a point on it.
All through.
Yeah, mine was a very specific ask. The story that was broken by BBC journalist Robin Meredith, very good reporter, with regards to the Education Authority here in Northern Ireland had decided not to proceed with a contract with Fujitsu worth almost 500 million. It was to ask around the specifics of that from the Education Authority as to why they felt the need to pull out of that large contract. We have an interest here in this committee over procurement, which spans right across the department. So we were to ask right to the Education Committee in order to give them their place. And I know that we haven't got anything back yet, but I think we should chase that up.
Yeah, yes, so we are going to chase that up. The Clark team have already done that just in relation to Jerry's, Diane's and Steve's suggestions. I think we can amalgamate them into a single question, which is to ask for an update on the work that has gone on around assessing Fujitsu's suitability. One of the first hearings we had when we came back, we had officials in front of us who said that they were part of a broader bit of work going on via the Cabinet Office and the Crown, I think involving what's called the Crown Commercial Service in London. I'm not sure we ever got a definitive answer on what end that took, or whether it was another cycle. So I think we'd like to find out exactly what's happened there, and whether that's just kind of is ongoing or there's been a specific outcome if people are content. But
yeah, thank you, Chair. And potentially in that correspondence, given that we haven't had those answers, should we invite them back?
Sure. I would be more than happy. Can I just say we'll get a response and then make a decision on who would be best. Jerry Carroll.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, members made important points and I'm happy with them all to be amalgamated, but I just think we should emphasise on reviewing all the contracts specifically because of the fact that, as Steve said, it's a bit of a rollover, and given the scale of the payout, it's I think we should specifically request that as well as other members' points as well.
Okay, I think we can capture that. Yeah, Deirdre.
I don't know if it's the Minister's responsibility to review all contracts. I mean, these are within different departments. So I think we would need to see legal advice in terms of what is within the remit of the Minister and what isn't. I also understand, I mean, the majority of contracts obviously came 2017 before, they might be rolling, but I think just to get more information behind each of these contracts and then to see what is under the remit of each of them. As you say, there's broader issues on the back of the Horizon scandal, which obviously we need to look at, and what we can legally then do in terms of Fujitsu and contracts, but I think we need more information and around where responsibility lies, because these contracts cut across a number of departments, so we just need the legal advice on that.
So, I'm not sure, perhaps the next stage might be getting us looking for legal advice. I think we can go back and ask, so first of all, it is at a policy level, the department does have overall responsibility for procurement through CPD, and they're the ones who are engaging with the Cabinet Office, so I think they can update us on where that conversation is. There may then be, clearly there will be individual legal contractual relationships between individuals.
Like
that is a more complicated question, but I think if we get, I think we can capture all the points that members wanted in a piece of correspondence. Then we can go from there, and we'll get that in the new year. If members are content with that, I am content we can capture all of the requests into the, okay. So that is that, folks. We are now going to move on to, I believe, the next thing. We've done everything else, and I'm hoping I'm not going to believe my 31. Yes, okay, so we're straight on to the draft forward work. Rather than discussing in detail, members, can I suggest that we note it, and if anyone has any comments, yeah, just to seek members' agreement to it, it's there, so if people are content to, well, something we've discussed at some length, and obviously we'll be updating as we go.
Only to say that I expect to see that Death and Stubber bill in January there.
We certainly do. Now, okay, so people are content. Any other business? Does anyone have any other business other than me to say to wish everyone happy Christmas on behalf of myself and the deputy chair, and to thank our team, our Clark team, to support. We have a small offering for you, which we'll give you at the after the end of business, but we will see everybody in the new year. The next is date, time and place. The next meeting of the committee is on Wednesday, 50th of January at 2 p.m. here in the Senate Chamber. We'll see you all then in 2025. The committee is now adjourned.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Or if you're lonely, you can come and join us in the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Committee. Isn't that right, Owen?
So I did ask, Peter did.